Chapter 219. In short, this new year was spent in a warm atmosphere. Apart from the unrest in the court, the capital was peaceful and nothing special happened. If there was anything special, it was unknown when Jin Er and Lu Zhu had started to talk. Although the young couple quarreled every day, anyone with a discerning eye could see that their relationship had improved a lot. Indeed, before the new year was over, Jin Er came over to ask for a favor and asked Xiao Xiao to talk about Jiang Ruan's marriage. Jiang Ruan's maidservant matched Xiao Xiao's secret guard. In terms of status, it was Lu Zhu who climbed up the social ladder. In the first place, Lu Zhu was not a child of the household, but rather a maidservant that had been bought from outside the residence. After following Jiang Ruan, she could be considered to have been lucky enough to become a second-rank maidservant. After the incident with Bai Ji, she filled in the gap and became a first-rank maidservant. Even so, this did not mean that she and Jin Er were on equal footing. Jin Er had been working for Xiao Xiao for many years. The genie guards were also particular. Those who could enter Xiao Xiao's service were considered to be trusted aides. Although they were secret guards, they were still comparable to a 7th-ranked military official. In addition, Jin Er's appearance was not bad. The genie guards were very well off. If these conditions were placed in an ordinary family, the door would be broken by the number of people seeking marriage. It was a loss. Jin Er followed Xiao Xiao and usually did not have such thoughts. In addition, his parents' hometown was outside, so he did not have a lot of trouble with women. But then again, this Jining Wang Fu had always been a place where men were abundant and women were scarce. A large group of men were trapped together. Lu Zhu was such a delicate little girl. She was smart and had a sweet mouth, so she was very popular in the Fu. Usually, there were many servants from the Fu who came to court her. When they heard that Lu Zhu and Jin Er's marriage had been set, they were naturally very disappointed. They only thought that one of Furen's maidservants had been snatched away. When Lian Xiao and Jiang Ruan talked about this matter, she was overjoyed. Of the two of them, one is like a firecracker, and the other is very crafty. When they meet, they will quarrel. I don't know how they fell in love. Thinking about it, it is really interesting. Jiang Ruan was sorting out the newly delivered account books. When she heard this, she glanced at her and said, "They fell in love, but did you fall in love?" Lian Xiao's laughter stopped abruptly. Her face flushed red as she said, "Miss, what are you saying?" In her anxiety, she used the way Jiang Ruan had addressed her before she was married. Lu Zhu opened the curtain and giggled when she heard what was said. Naturally, there are some who have closed their eyes. I heard that Yi Fengyi, the imperial bodyguard, occupied the Fu's willow tree for half the night yesterday, playing the flute. Speaking of this matter, it was another topic of conversation in Jining Wangfu. The young master of Jining Wangfu, Xiao Xiao, was a taciturn gourd. Every single bodyguard under him was an expert in the field of love. He had a set of methods to please a lady. Even Yi Feng, who usually looked more mature, also imitated those scholars and poets who wrote, "A phoenix seeking for a phoenix under the willow tree." His direction was in the direction of Lian Xiao's house. Lian Xiao was both embarrassed and annoyed. She stamped her feet and said, I can't win against Miss in an argument. It's better to go out." After saying this, she jogged out of the room. Behind him, Dewdrop put her hands on her hips and laughed, "You're angry? What's there to be angry about?" After all, Lian Xiao had been raised in the Fu. Although she was shrewish, she still scrupulously abided by etiquette. When she heard about her own love affairs, she naturally felt shy. Lu Zhu, on the other hand, was bold. At a young age, she had wandered the streets and alleys and had been stained with the atmosphere of Jianghu. Jiang Ruan looked at her appearance and for a moment, she was somewhat absent-minded. She recalled that when she first met this child, it was the first year after her rebirth. At that time, she was alone in the rural residence and had no one to rely on. This child had a kind heart and stubbornly insisted on following her. In the blink of an eye, things had changed. Her enemies were either dead or injured. The more she lived, the more glorious she became. Fortunately, Lu Zhu had not followed her in vain. In the end, she could be considered to have found happiness. Jiang Wan put down the teacup in her hand and pulled Lu Zhu to her side. She withdrew the smile on her face and looked at the smiling young girl in front of her. Lu Zhu, have you thought it through? If you've decided, it's him. He naturally referred to Jean Eyre. As long as it was a maidservant, before the mistress made the decision to marry someone, she would still symbolically ask for the maidservant's opinion. Lu Zhu lowered her head and immediately raised it again to smile at Jiang Wan. Lu Zhu's set of spotlessly white teeth were very brilliant. It's him, Mississippi, Jiang Wan nodded. Although Jean Eyre looked unreliable and was used to having the appearance of a playboy, a person like him who was used to seeing the brothel knew better than others what she wanted. Moreover, Lu Zhu was not a fool, so there was no reason for her to be bullied by Jean Eyre. It was just that Jean Eyre had proposed this marriage in a hurry. She did not know what Jean Eyre was thinking. Since both sides had agreed, Jean Eyre also wrote a letter home to inform his parents in Jiangnan. Lu Zhu's contract to sell herself was in Jiang Ruan's hands. Naturally, it was up to Jiang Wan and Xiao Xiao to decide on the marriage. They would only have to wait until the end of next summer to complete the marriage. I will let you marry in style. Jiang Wan said, you have no parents, so leave the matter of the dowry to me. Lu Zhu was stunned and raised her head in disbelief, meeting Jiang Ruan's gaze. Jiang Wan smiled at her, and Lu Zhu's eyes immediately reddened. She only said, Miss, how would this servant dare? There is nothing to dare or not dare. At that time, I made it clear that since you risked your life to follow me and gamble on an unknown path, now it's time to pay back. Even if you go to the casino to gamble, there will be a prize. Just treat it as a profit. What kind of words were these? Lu Zhu wanted to laugh, but at the same time, she also felt like crying. She knew that Jiang Wan usually treated people with alienation. Even her personal maidservants, such as Bai Ji and Lian Xiao, who were her personal maidservants in the past, seemed to have her own secrets. She was not very close to them, and unlike other masters, she was always smiling and joking with them. Following Jiang Wan, Lu Zhu had only seen danger. Jiang Wan even used violence to curb violence. She seemed to always be ice cold, but deep down, she was extremely protective of her own people. Usually, she was just not good at expressing it, but she was a very gentle person. Lu Zhu thought with tears in her eyes. Jiang Wan couldn't help but laugh. She did not care about these things. Just then, Jean Yi came in and handed the letter from the palace to Jiang Wan. Jiang Wan let Lu Zhu go and read it herself. It was a letter from Xian Pei. There was nothing written on it. First, he wished her well in the new year, then he complained that he could not see Jiang Wan while he stayed in the palace. It was all thanks to his status as a prince that he was not free. Finally, he said that the emperor was in a bad mood and the atmosphere in the palace was relatively gloomy. It was better not to enter the palace. After reading the letter, Jiang Wan put it in the candlelight and burned it. However, her heart could not calm down for a long time. The emperor was not in a bad mood, but was seriously ill. She knew this from Xiao Xiao. Xian Pei, this child, was originally unwilling to talk about his grievances. After his rebirth, his temperament had changed greatly. The more he did not mention anything about the palace, the more suspicious it seemed. Jiang Wan stared at the burning ashes in the candlelight and slowly pondered. At the same time, in a quiet courtyard in the capital, a man in gray stood in front of the window and threw the paper in his hand into the flickering candlelight. The candlelight very quickly engulfed the somewhat yellowed paper. It was unknown what it was made of, but it also carried a strange fragrance. After a long while, he slowly curled up his red lips and said, "So that's how it is. Darren, the Holy Maiden's edict has yet to arrive." The subordinate inquired. Yuan Chuan smiled, "There's no need." The subordinate was startled. He saw the man in gray suddenly reach out and lift his hat, revealing a full face. It was not entirely accurate to say that it was a full face. It was half a mask, and on the mask was a ghost face that was baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. It was very terrifying, but the half of the face that was revealed was very handsome. Such a face with a mask should have given people a mysterious sense of beauty. However, when this person appeared in front of them, there was a sense of mystery, but there was no sense of beauty. This was because it was completely destroyed by a pair of green eyes. These green eyes were long and narrow, like those of a fox. On a human face, it was like a monster, giving people an inexplicable sense of fear. It was a very sinister feeling. The subordinate shivered and hurriedly lowered his head, not daring to meet Yuan Chuan's eyes. Yuan Chuan did not even look at him, and slowly said, "The holy maiden has already entered the capital." The subordinate suddenly raised his head, and said with some disbelief, "This." When Yuan Chuan entered the capital, the holy maiden had not yet entered the capital. Now, there was not even a word about this. How did she suddenly come to the capital of the great Jin dynasty? The subordinate was still guessing, but he saw that pair of fox-like green eyes glance at him indifferently. He could not help but feel a chill in his heart, and had no idea what to do. Yuan Chuan slowly smiled again. His lips were red, as if he had put on the best rouge. They were even more beautiful than a woman's, and when he smiled, there was an indescribable demonic charm. He said, "Is the edict of the holy maiden something that you can casually guess?" "I don't dare, I don't dare, I don't dare." The subordinate immediately broke out in a cold sweat. He only heard the person above him say with a slight smile, "Really, seeing that it's your first offense, I'll spare you." The man was about to thank him when he suddenly felt a chill in his chest. Looking up, he saw a speck of silver light on his chest. A small and exquisite scimitar, only the size of a thumb, had accurately pierced his heart. His eyes widened, and his face began to turn black. After a short while, he collapsed. His blood was black, and it was obvious that he had also been poisoned. Yuan Chuan smiled coldly, and then slowly looked out of the window. Only then did he sigh, not knowing whether it was joy or sorrow. In the quiet courtyard where there was still a corpse, his sigh was especially terrifying. Human life is nothing more than grass. He slowly smiled again, and a strange light seemed to flash in his green eyes. Looking at the empty space, he muttered to himself, How long can you live, in the palace?" Recently, the emperor's appetite was light, and he could not eat anything that had a strong taste. The lotus seed was clear, but it tasted bitter. Many people in the world were unable to endure the bitter taste, especially when it came to the food of the emperor. One had to say that the lotus seed was marinated with honey to remove the bitter taste, and the porridge that was boiled out was more fragrant and sweet. But Dong Ying'er reached out and took out a sachet from her waist, and took out some white powder from inside. That powder also had a strange fragrance, and when it was sprinkled on the lotus seed, it was submerged by the fresh honey, and only smelled more fragrant. That little eunuch's smiling and fawning words seemed to be transmitted into her ears. "Lady Xiui's lotus seed porridge is very good, and His Majesty cannot leave it every day. This skill can be said to be better than the chefs in the imperial kitchen. This servant sees that in the future, His Majesty and Lady Xiui will only get closer and closer, and will not be able to leave Lady Xiui." Dong Ying'er put away the sachet, and her eyes fell on the lotus seed that seemed to be no different from other things, and her lips slowly bloomed into a smile. However, that smile was a little stiff, as if someone was forcefully pulling on her skin to force it out. It looked a little strange. The emperor naturally could not leave her, and not only could he not leave her, he would become more and more dependent on her, or it could be said that he was not dependent on her, but the lotus seed porridge that she made. Things that could make people addicted would not be noticed by others, and even the most brilliant imperial doctor would not be able to see it. They would only think that the emperor liked the porridge that she made. In order to not arouse suspicion, she naturally would not make porridge every day. In fact, anything was the same, as long as it could make the emperor addicted. She slowly grabbed her skirt, and remembered what that person from the palace had said to her earlier. The General Fu intended to marry Miss Xiao as a wife for the Jiang family's eldest master, and now they were discussing the matter of exchanging gung cards. Jiang family's eldest master, Jiang Xing, and Xiao family's Miss, Xiao Jin. Dong Ying'er suddenly closed her eyes and took a deep breath, but in the end, she could not bear it anymore, and she swept everything in front of her to the ground. The palace maid waiting outside jumped in fright, and suddenly wanted to come in, saying, "Lady Shui, get out!" Dong Ying'er angrily shouted, and the people outside immediately went silent, not daring to move. She looked at the broken pieces of porcelain on the ground, and a trace of resentment flashed through her eyes. In this world, why was there someone with such a good life? They had the same birth, and how was she inferior to others, but she was thrown into this deep palace to gradually wither? Why? Since it was like this, it was better to go to hell together. After all, she would not be so lonely. A certain house in Jiangnan was embroidered with black walls and white tiles. It was very exquisite, and the style was elegant. With one look, one could tell that it was a wealthy family. At this moment, the manservant outside the door hurriedly ran in, shouting, "Madam, madam." The woman sitting in the main hall had a kind and amiable appearance. She was only in her 40s, and looked dignified and virtuous. Although she was old, it could be seen that when she was young, she must have been a beauty. Wearing a honey-colored silk jacket, she scolded with a smile, running so quickly, "I didn't cut your tongue. Speak slowly." The manservant smiled embarrassedly, and took out a letter from his chest, saying, "Madam, the young master has sent a letter." "Erlang has sent a letter." When the woman heard this, she stood up, and her face immediately showed an expression of uncontrollable joy. She said, "Quickly let me see." The manservant hurriedly handed it over with both hands. The woman took the letter and impatiently opened it to read. She read 10 lines at a glance, and read very quickly. After a few seconds, she finished reading. Immediately, a rebuking and smiling expression appeared on her face. When the servant girls and older women saw her application, they were all somewhat curious. They asked, "Madam, how is the second young master? This child?" The woman patted her chest and said, "He hasn't replied a single letter all year round. He really doesn't put me, his mother, in his eyes. He has already decided on such an important matter, and only replied at this time, really." The older woman who was serving her tea at the front was even more confused. She asked with some doubt, "What is Madam talking about? Is it that the second young master has been promoted?" Since she said it was an important matter, and her own madam's face did not show any sad expression, it should be a promotion. Thinking of this, the older woman also smiled. "If it is so, then it is a very joyous matter. We should celebrate. It is a joyous matter, but not a promotion." The woman also smiled. It was Erlang who asked Wang Ye to arrange a marriage. "He just came back to tell us this." The older woman asked, "Which family's young miss is it?" "It is a first-rank servant girl of Wang Fei." The woman said with a smile. "Servant girl? That side is still a slave. With second young master's status, I'm afraid." The older woman deliberated over her words and carefully looked at the woman's expression. When the woman saw her like this, she smiled again and said, "I know what you are thinking in your heart. You feel that my family's Erlang has been wronged. However, since Wang Ye has shown kindness to our family, if it wasn't for Wang Ye, how could we have lived like this? We would have long become a pile of dirt. Our family is not an official's family, we are just doing business. That girl's status is not high, but it is not an unsuitable family." Furen, the older woman, was still somewhat unwilling. "Even though we are not an official's family, we are still a large family in Jiangnan. With second young master's status, what kind of decent family's young miss can't he find?" But the woman slowly looked at her. The older woman knew that she had said the wrong thing and immediately became slightly uneasy. She only heard the woman sigh and say, "What do you think Erlang's status is?" "Erlang is willing to work for Wang Ye. After so many years, there are very few letters a year. I'm afraid that what he does is dangerous. With this kind of danger, that usually pampered young miss would be willing to marry him." This marriage was personally asked by Erlang to Wang Ye. Even if Erlang himself and the child are to his liking, I, as a mother, have no reason to stop them. Alright, since Erlang is Wang Ye's subordinate, Wang Ye can make his own decisions. Wang Ye thinks this marriage is good, and I also agree. I think that Laoi will not do anything wrong. If one does not keep his word, he will not stand. The people by Wang Fei's side will not be wrong. She thought of that calm and cold black-clothed youth and a smile floated onto her face. This woman was so understanding, the older woman did not say anything. Also, there was nothing wrong with the woman's words. The older woman gradually smiled and said, "That is a joyous matter. If the marriage is done early, it won't be long before Furen will have another golden grandson. The 8 characters haven't even been set in stone, and you are already making it so lively." The woman rebuked, but the smile on her face became even more joyous. As they spoke, they heard someone say from outside, "Mother, what are you talking about to make you so happy? Erxie should also be happy to hear it." "De Granny." A group of servant girls and older women hurriedly greeted with a smile. A young woman walked in from outside. This woman had a matron's hairstyle. It was the Foo's de Granny. The woman smiled and said, "We are talking about your second brother's marriage. You came at the right time. I will talk with you." As the woman spoke, she suddenly stilled and looked behind the young woman. It was a young girl wearing a pink-lined jacket. She was about 16 or 17 years old. Hearing the woman's words, she raised her head with a smile and bowed to the woman. "Greetings to Furen. This is..." The woman was somewhat puzzled. The young woman smiled and pulled the hand of the pink-clothed girl beside her. She said with a smile, "Mother, this is such a coincidence. I was just about to talk to you about this matter. Do you still remember this miss? This is Ding Shi's Liao family's big Miss Liao." The girl also smiled faintly and seemed to be a bit shy. She raised her face and this time, it was clear that the girl had delicate features and a very elegant temperament. She was like a flower bud that had just bloomed. She said, "Liao Meng greets Furen." The woman's hand trembled and the teacup instantly fell to the ground. Chapter 220. On the surface, after the new year, nothing seemed to have happened, and Jiang Quan's sentence was handed down, which was to be executed by beheading. Actually, there were many filthy things that happened in large families. If they were slightly covered up, they would lose their official hat and their reputation would be ruined. The consequences of losing one's life were somewhat severe, but when everyone thought about who the victim was, they were well aware of it. Zhao Guang had exerted a lot of pressure on the court judge in this case, and the final outcome of the case had been personally witnessed by the emperor. When a wall is down, everyone pushes it, and when a tree is down, the sun will scatter. Those who had previously curried favor with Jiang Quan now wished that they could distance themselves from him. Naturally, no one would speak up for Jiang Quan. On the day of Jiang Quan's beheading, Jiang Ruan did not go. Lian Qiao did not dare to ask too much. After all, he was Jiang Ruan's biological father. No matter how ruthless he usually was, personally sending his own father to the guillotine was a different scene. Presumably, Jiang Ruan was also very sad. Looking at Lian Qiao's cautious appearance, Jiang Ruan was somewhat amused. She and Jiang Quan had been mortal enemies in their previous lives, and this had not changed in this life. Between the two of them, one would die at the hands of the other. As for blood relations, as Jiang Xinji had said to her that day, in this life, she would no longer have anything to do with the Jiang family. Speaking of this, Lian Qiao seemed to recall something and said, "Young madam, eldest young master has spoken to the General Fu. Madam's memorial tablet will be sent to the General Fu's ancestral hall on another day, and your name will also be erased from the Jiang family's genealogy book. In the future, the Jiang family will not be able to speak of this matter. Jiang Wan sending her biological father to the guillotine should have set off a storm in the capital. People's hearts were like this: as long as there was something to discuss, they would always regard themselves as a wise person who could guide the country. Up until the day of Jiang Quan's beheading, there was not the slightest mention of Jiang Ruan being unfilial. This was because Xiao Xiao had used a special method to block the mouths of the public. As for that method, be it iron or blood, or gold or silver, in the end, it was a slow act of shielding her, unwilling to let anyone mention a single bad word to Jiang Ruan. That's good, Jiang Ruan put down the brush in her hand. I'll return to the General Fu another day. The opening of the ancestral hall is also a major event. Zhao Mei's memorial tablet had always been in the Jiang Fu's ancestral hall. When she had first gone to the rural residence, it had been several years since she had returned. During this time, Zhao Mei's memorial tablet had not been worshipped and had accumulated a deep layer of dust. If she had not cleaned it herself, it would have rotted in the ancestral hall. Now that the three of them were no longer part of the Jiang family, the memorial tablets should be returned to the general's mansion. As Jiang Wan spoke, she looked outside and asked, "Why don't I see any dew?" In the past few days, she had been writing about Lu Zhu's marriage. To her, Lu Zhu was a trustworthy person after her rebirth. She was not so much a maidservant, but a companion whom she had always supported. Dewdrop had no parents, but she couldn't hastily arrange the marriage. Otherwise, she would always feel inferior in the future. Although they couldn't do anything extravagant, they had to do it according to the standards of a proper family's young miss. She's probably embroidering her dowry in the room. Lian Xiao smiled and said, "Young Furen treats Lu Zhu so well that Nubi is a little jealous." Other people's personal maidservants could marry with dignity, but it was only because they had more money. It was rare to see one who personally took care of it with all her heart. Moreover, Lu Zhu had married well. Although Jean Eyre was a little stubborn and mischievous, his heart wasn't bad. What was even rarer was that the two of them were in love with each other. For a servant, marrying the person she loved was almost impossible. But now, it was done. Lian Xiao thought of how difficult it was for the few of them to take a step forward in the rural residence. She had thought that a peaceful and smooth life was an extravagant hope. Looking at the good days they had now, she could only sigh with emotion. "In the future, when you and Yifeng get married, I will also arrange it for you." Jiang Wan smiled. Lian Xiao stamped her feet and said, "Young Furen is making fun of Nubi again." Although she was embarrassed and angry, she was also happy to see Jiang Wan smile. She didn't know why, but she felt that Jiang Wan had changed a lot. She couldn't tell what had changed, but she felt that Jiang Wan seemed to be more gentle when she looked at people. She wasn't like before, when she looked at people through clouds and mist, which made people feel a little diffident. This was probably all thanks to Xiao Xiao. Lian Xiao thought about it and felt a little grateful towards Xiao Xiao. "Go to the room and see if Lu Zhu is there." Jiang Wan said, "If she is, bring her here. She has to look through this gift list herself." Lian Xiao complied and ran out. Lu Zhu was indeed in the room, but she wasn't embroidering a dowry. Instead, she was embroidering a screen for official Lin's wife. Lin Furen's birthday was coming up in a few days. Jiang Wan and Lin Zixiang were on good terms, so she had to give some gifts. Official Lin was an elegant person, so it was best to give her a pine crane screen. Although this screen looked simple, it was somewhat complicated to embroider. Coincidentally, double-sided needles were Lu Zhu's specialty, so she also embroidered in the room, but she forgot the time to go out. Lian Xiao pushed the door open and came in. Seeing this, she said, "Why are you still in the mood to stay here? Young Furen wants you to look at the gift list." "Ah, I want to finish embroidering this crane's beak as soon as possible." There isn't much time left. If there are any areas that are not right, I can still make changes. Lu Zhu smiled and said, what's there to look at in the gift list? How can young Furen's foresight be bad? I am very relieved. Lian Xiao laughed and scolded, nonsense. Can't you order your mistress around? Hurry up and go. I don't know how you, a bride-to-be, are not even anxious about the dowry. You are really getting more and more mischievous. Lu Zhu knew that she was in the wrong, so she packed up her embroidery needles, stood up, shook her skirt, and followed Lian Xiao. Jiang Wan was adding a few things. When she saw her, she handed over the list, take a look and see what else is missing. Lu Zhu took the list with a smile and quickly looked through it. At first, her expression was full of smiles, but then she became somewhat stunned. In the end, there was even some panic. She said, young Furen, this is too expensive. What's there to be afraid of? Jiang Wan smiled, in any case, it's all from the Wang Fu. Your Wang Ye has plenty of money. Lian Xiao snickered. Why did these words sound as if Xiao Xiao was an old master who had a sudden outburst? Lu Zhu's eyes darted around. Although her expression softened a little, she was still somewhat uneasy, but the gift list inside was really too expensive for a servant girl. Even those head servant girls who had been with high officials and noble families for the longest time did not have this kind of dignity. However, what moved her the most was that it was not only gold and silver. Even some of the dowry's jewelry and other trivial things were also arranged in a thoughtful manner. This meant that one had to be attentive. No buts. Jiang Wan interrupted her, you deserve it. Lu Zhu did not speak. She only bit her lip and slowly knelt down. Lian Xiao and Jiang Wan were startled. Lu Zhu solemnly kowtowed to Jiang Wan 3 times and said, Mrs. Kindness towards Lu Zhu is as heavy as a mountain. Lu Zhu does not have any relatives. Miss is Lu Zhu's relative in my heart. In this lifetime, Lu Zhu will definitely serve Miss well and follow by Mrs. side forever. Jiang Wan laughed in spite of herself and said, get up. Don't kneel at the drop of a hat. There is no need to talk about kindness being as heavy as a mountain. You and I have come through the most difficult times together. At that time, you endured. Now is the time for you to enjoy your blessings. Moreover, it is not a big deal. In the future, it is better for you to live well on your own. These words were referring to Jean Eyre. Lu Zhu seemed to have thought of something and she also smiled shyly. At the same time, Jean Eyre, who Jiang Wan and Lu Zhu were talking about, was standing in front of a residence in an alley in the eastern part of the city. He went forward and knocked on the door a few times. Very quickly, a manservant came out from inside and opened the door. After exchanging a few words with Jean Eyre, he went in to take a look. Just as he walked into the courtyard, he saw that the door to the house had been opened and a short and plump middle-aged woman walked out. When the woman saw Jean Eyre, she was stunned for a moment before she called out in pleasant surprise, second young master. Jean Eyre also smiled, Zhou Mama, why have you suddenly come to the capital city? This old servant has been ordered by Furen to bring you here to see someone, Zhou Mama also smiled. Another person walked out from behind the door. This was a young woman. She was also born with the countenance of a flower and the countenance of the moon. Her charm was outstanding, but the style of the clothes she wore was from a few years ago. The color was also somewhat pale. Even so, she still appeared to be quite cultured. She looked at Jean Eyre and smiled faintly, second young master. Very quickly, the wind began to blow in the night. The cold wind outside blew loudly against the windows, but Jingyang Palace was a sheet of silence. Occasionally, a few hurried coughs could be heard, but they were indistinct and unreal. Eunuch Li handed over a bowl of white silk and worriedly said, the weather is cold and the dew is heavy. Your Majesty should rest early. There are still many memorials to the throne. The emperor waved his hand. If this continues, perhaps before the approval is finished, you cannot say that. Eunuch Li immediately knelt on the ground. Your Majesty. That's enough. The emperor smiled first. We haven't said anything yet. Why are you kneeling? Perhaps it was the illness that caused his expression to become more haggard. His originally imposing expression had also softened. It was as if his previous domineering aura had diminished overnight, and he actually appeared to have aged. Eunuch Li's heart immediately jumped. He felt that the emperor's appearance was very similar to the late emperor's when he was gravely ill. At that time, he was still a young eunuch. His adoptive father had accompanied the late emperor back. Now, the emperor's expression, could it be? Eunuch Li shivered and didn't dare to think further. You can leave. We will be alone for a while, the emperor suddenly said. Eunuch Li hurriedly complied and pushed him away. In the empty great hall, there was only a bright yellow figure sitting alone on the soft seat in the center. The emperor's hand was on the armrest. The armrest was carved in the shape of a roaring dragon. He paused and asked, "Why did you specially come here to wait for me?" Dewdrop saw that he laughed and did not bicker with him like she usually did. She only said, "You look a little different today. You're probably tired. Go and freshen up and rest first." "I don't have anything to do, I just came to see you." Dewdrop swallowed the two words, "miss you." She had heard from Lien Qiao and Jean San that women should be more reserved. If they said everything they wanted, they would be completely dominated by men in the future. She and Jean Eyre were not married yet, so she could not flatter him. Jean Eyre smiled and did not tease her like he usually did. He only said a few words to Dewdrop to rest well and then left. As soon as Jean Eyre left, the smile on Dewdrop's face disappeared and was replaced with a puzzled expression. Dewdrop stood at the same spot and muttered to herself, "He doesn't seem to be in a good mood. Could it be that he messed up the task?" After thinking for a while, she still could not think of any reason, so she turned around and returned to her room. Jiang Wan put down the book at the side and conveniently placed her hand on Xiao Xiao's chest. This person's body was not as cold as his appearance. It was really a big warm stove. Her hand was very warm. Xiao Xiao was caught off guard by her ice-cold hand and for a moment, he did not know whether to laugh or cry. However, he could not bear to tell her to take it out, so he only said, "Why is it so cold?" "It's a list to help Dewdrop plan a marriage." Jiang Wan pressed her hand against his body again, "So marriage is so complicated. At that time, our marriage was completely dependent on housekeeper Lin alone. It must have been hard on him. Dewdrop's simple marriage was so complicated. At that time, she and Xiao Xiao had made it so that everyone would turn out, and the tricks involved were even more dazzling. It did not seem like much, but once she did it herself, she felt that it was very difficult to sit up." Xiao Xiao looked at her for a while and suddenly said, "I also asked about it." "What?" Jiang Wan did not understand his words. However, Xiao Xiao said indifferently, "Nothing." His expression was somewhat unnatural. Jiang Wan thought about it and guessed a bit more. She said, "Don't tell me that you also thought about many of the tricks involved." Xiao Xiao did not answer, which meant that he tacitly agreed. Jiang Wan was stunned. This person did not seem to care much about marriage, but why did he secretly inquire about such trivial matters? Naturally, she did not know that at that time, the marriage was indeed handled by housekeeper Lin, but those details were all personally given to Xiao Xiao to look over. Xiao Xiao had even arranged it according to the most expensive wedding of the late emperor. Otherwise, with just housekeeper Lin alone, how could it be possible for him to throw money so recklessly and not say a word? Jiang Wan laughed. Xiao Xiao was somewhat annoyed. He glanced at her and said, "You are so serious as if you are marrying off your daughter." Since her rebirth, besides revenge, Jiang Wan had never properly handled such a matter. For her, this was also the first time. Xiao Xiao's words seemed to be somewhat jealous. These past few days, she had been busy asking housekeeper Lin about Dewdrop and had indeed neglected him. Thinking about this, Jiang Wan reached out and pinched Xiao Xiao's cheek, saying, "If I had a daughter, she would definitely be even more serious. Not to mention me, I think you would be even more nervous than me." "Daughter?" Xiao Xiao looked at her thoughtfully. His gaze was as deep as the stars. When Jiang Wan was looked at by his dark eyes, she immediately felt numb all over her body. She said, "Do what?" As soon as her voice fell, she felt the world spin. She and Xiao Xiao had already become one above the other. Xiao Xiao looked at her and faintly said, "Indeed, but first, we must have a daughter." In the 8th Prince's Fu, the advisor looked at Xianli, who was drinking and enjoying himself. For a moment, he was somewhat puzzled. It seemed that he had not seen Xianli so happy for a long time. Although Xianli had been used to putting on a smiling posture for many years, the people around him knew that it was just a facade. It had indeed been a long time since they had seen their master's face reveal such pride from the bottom of his heart. The advisor cautiously asked, "Your Highness is so happy. Is it because you have made an appointment with that Yuan Chuan?" That envoy of Tianjin's conduct was mysterious and strange. Although he was an envoy, he did not have the slightest bit of servility or subservience. In fact, there was even a natural air of superiority. The advisor had followed by Xianli's side and had seen many people in his life. With one glance, he could tell that this Yuan Chuan was not a person who was easy to control. To have a relationship with such a person, or even to form an alliance, was a very dangerous thing. If one was not careful, one could lose one's life. Moreover, this Yuan Chuan did not seek fame or fortune, which made the advisor even more vigilant. The two of them were undoubtedly using each other. Xianli was using Yuan Chuan to scheme for a great cause, but what did Yuan Chuan want to use Xianli to seek? The advisor could not see through it, so he could only explain to Xianli, "No, there is no need to make an appointment for a great plan." Xianli slowly raised the wine cup on the table and took a sip. He smiled and said, "There are no allies, only a knife that I can use. Moreover, it is a good knife." This. The advisor suddenly thought of something and asked in surprise, "How does your Highness use this knife? The person who uses the knife is not you or me." Xianli said, "But the tree cut by this knife is also in my way." This was to reap the benefits. Although the advisor was still a little confused, looking at Xianli's appearance, it did not seem like he wanted to tell him. Although this 8th prince had countless followers and advisors, he had his own unique ideas on many things. He did not even completely distrust them. There would always be some leeway for everything. This kind of person was actually rare in the world. To be able to always maintain a vigilant heart and not be shaken by any external things, this was the quality of an emperor. "Your Highness, do you think it will succeed this time?" The advisor asked. That Yuan Chuan did not seem to have done anything from the beginning to the end. "How can your Highness be so sure just based on his mouth?" "I have said that the knife is a good knife." Xianli smiled and drank the wine in his hand. "I hope it can be used to the best of its ability." As he spoke, a person dressed as a guard rushed in from outside. He took out a letter from his hand and presented it to Xianli. "Your Highness, a secret letter from the palace." Xianli took it and looked at it carelessly. There were only 2 simple words on it, "Success." Xianli smiled again. That smile fell into the eyes of the advisor, had a different meaning. Compared to the joy just now, there was a bit of ruthlessness. That expression quickly disappeared, as if it had never existed on Xianli's face. He sighed and said in a low voice, "His Majesty is seriously ill." That night, in a house in the capital, a young woman stood under a tree. Her expression was very sad. The short and fat woman on the side advised, "Miss, you should rest early. The wind is strong here. Mrs. Body is not good. You have to recuperate here." The woman smiled bitterly and her voice was very bleak. "Mother, my heart is uncomfortable. Miss, don't think too much. The woman also said, second young master will certainly understand. You are serious. Second young master's child, this old servant, has watched him grow up. He has a good heart. Since he has come today, he will not refuse. Second young master invited a doctor for Mississippi. After a long time, he will naturally see through Mrs. Hart. Miss, don't worry. Madam and master will definitely make a decision for you. But he has already said it. The woman shook her head again. What's the difference between me and a wicked person who breaks up a family? How can you be a wicked person? Mother Zhou comforted her, Miss is a girl from a decent family. You are also an old acquaintance. There will be no mistake in this matter. If it is really wrong, how can Madam and Master agree to let you come to the capital? Since the princess is a sensible person, she must know the reason. She will never embarrass Miss with this matter. As for second young master, I will say something overstepping. Miss is beautiful and kind-hearted. You are also from a decent family. How can you be worse than a maid? Second young master will definitely like you. How can a man not like a well-educated daughter? So miss, you can rest assured. Now it is better to have a good rest. Don't hurt your body. After listening to Mother Zhou's words, the woman's expression also relaxed. She smiled and said, I think too much. Forget it. This is also fate. Since I am here, I just want to ask his opinion. Since I have seen him, and my body is not good, I have to rest here first. When I feel better, I will go back. Mother Zhou wanted to say more, but when she saw the woman's expression, she stopped and had to nod. Chapter 221. These few days, Lu Zhu finally became busy. She probably realized that it was not good to let her mistress worry about such trivial matters, so she started to embroider her own dowry. After all, she was a 17 or 18-year-old girl and was looking forward to getting married. However, Jean Eyre was also very busy, but it was not because of the marriage. She did not see him in the residence all day, so Lu Zhu could only ask Jean San. Jean San only vaguely said that he did not know what Jean Eyre was busy with, and that it was probably a task assigned by her mistress. Lu Zhu then returned. However, this continued for more than 10 times, and the time that Lu Zhu saw Jean Eyre became less and less. One day, Lu Zhu found out from Jean San that Jean Eyre was not in the residence, so she left in disappointment. After Jean San saw that Lu Zhu had left, he jumped onto a tree and sat down to talk to Jean Si. He said, what happened to Jean Eyre recently? Why is he always not in the residence? Mistress doesn't seem to have any tasks assigned to him. I've never seen him so busy that he doesn't even care about Lu Zhu. In the past, although Jean Eyre was also busy, he still had to stay in the residence. His favorite thing to do was to make Lu Zhu angry. Now that the relationship between the two of them had been settled, why was Jean Eyre still not seeing her? Jean Si shook his head and said, I don't know either. However, a few days ago, I saw him at Huitong Money House. He seemed to be exchanging money for banknotes, but I don't know what he's doing. Exchanging money for banknotes? Jean San asked curiously, he doesn't lack any money, why is he exchanging money for banknotes? The embroidered uniform guards had quite a lot of money on them, at least enough to cover their daily expenses. It was strange for Jean Eyre to collect banknotes alone. Jean San thought for a while and suddenly slapped his thigh and said, I know. Sigh, this fellow is finally enlightened. He must have finally remembered that he is also someone who is going to marry, so he must buy something for his wife. Although the betrothal gift is given by the residence, Jean Eyre has saved up quite a lot of money over the years. It's the same if he gives the betrothal gift. Jean Si nodded and said, what you said makes sense. Jean Eyre has seen the world and is used to doing things to make a woman happy. He must spend more effort to give something to his wife. No wonder he hasn't been in the mansion these past few days. He's probably looking for a gift for Dewdrop. But it's really not good to give him the cold shoulder just because of this. Jin-san thought for a moment, this woman needs to be coaxed. He didn't even say what he was busy with. If I were Lu Zhu, I would definitely be angry. Jin-si wanted to say something, but Jin-yi, who had been hugging his sword in silence, suddenly said, he is not here to buy gifts. Jin-san looked over in astonishment and said, if you're not here to buy a gift, then what are you doing? Genie, do you know something? Genie, on the other hand, shook his head and turned to leave. Jin-san and Jin-si were already used to Genie's taciturn personality, so they shrugged their shoulders and pretended not to see anything. Genie walked to a corner and saw Yi Feng walking over. Yi Feng's expression was also rather subtle. He glanced at Jin-yi and asked, you also know about Jin Er's search for a physician? Genie responded and hesitated for a moment before saying, I'll follow them to take a look. I've seen them too. Yi Feng interrupted him. The two of them seemed to be in a difficult situation, as if they had encountered an extremely thorny problem. Both of them were silent for a while before Yi Feng said, don't tell anyone about this first. I'll ask Jin Er when he returns to the residence. It would be bad if our friendship is damaged because of this. Jin-yi nodded in agreement. In a house in the east of the capital city, a short and plump woman stood at the door of a house. She kept wiping her hands on her apron, appearing extremely nervous. Not long after, an old man with white hair and beard walked out from inside. The old man carried a medicine box on his back. After he came out, he cupped his hands towards the short and plump woman. A young man walked over from the other side. This man could be considered handsome and was dressed in a clean dark green robe. He looked like the young master of a large family. The old man cupped his hands towards the man and said, young master, I've already prescribed medicine to nurse Madame's illness. It's just that her body is already weak and she's traveled a long distance. It's best for her not to move anymore to prevent her from getting better. It's best for her to stay for a few more months. I've prescribed some medicine to strengthen her body. Later, I'll get someone to brew the medicine for Madame to consume. Don't let her worry. The man was a little embarrassed when he heard this, she's not. Then he said, forget it, thank you doctor. I'm just afraid that this illness will relapse. I'll have to trouble you a few times in the future. After saying this, he took out a silver ingot from his sleeve and placed it in the old man's palm. This is the consultation fee. This man was quite generous. Naturally, the old man had nothing else to say. He cupped his hands and left. After the old man left, the short and plump woman said, second young master, according to what the doctor said, it's best for Miss Liao to stay in the capital city for a few more days, so that, Mother Zhou, Jin Er smiled when he heard the words, do you think I'll send Miss Liao out? It's fine. You can stay here for the time being. I'll write a letter to my mother. I'll have to trouble Mother Zhou to take care of Miss Liao these days. What are you saying, second young master? Mother Zhou said in fear, this old servant will take good care of Miss Liao. As they were talking, they heard a woman's cough coming from the room. Then, a slightly weak female voice came, second young master, please stay. Liao Meng still has something to say to second young master. Seeing this, Mother Liao hurriedly said, this old servant will send the doctor out. Second young master, you can go inside. After that, she went out of the room. Jin Er hesitated for a moment. Although he used to linger in the brothel, it was all for show. He couldn't take it seriously. After that, no one would pursue the reputation of these women. This girl from a decent family was different. After all, it was a bit excessive for a man and a woman to stay together in a room. However, thinking that Liao Meng was a patient after all, and it was his mother who asked someone to send her to the capital city from thousands of miles away, he gave up. He lifted the corner of his robe and entered the room. The room was clean and tidy, and there was a faint smell of medicine. There was even a pot of orchid on the windowsill. It was obvious that the owner was an elegant person. Even though he was sick, he still lived his days in an elegant manner. The woman leaned against the bed. Her face was still a bit pale, but she looked even more delicate and pitiful. She respectfully nodded to Jean Eyre, second young master. Jean Eyre said, "No need to be overly courteous. Your body is still very weak. It's better not to move easily. Second young master has a heart of Buddha." The woman smiled faintly. Liao Meng knows that this body is not worthy of second young master. The words between the two families were just a joke. Once my body has recovered, Liao Meng will return to Jiangnan and won't disturb second young master. It's just that I have troubled you a lot during this period of time. I feel really apologetic. After thinking about it, I still have to thank second young master. You don't need to thank me. It's me. Jean Eyre hesitated for a moment. Finally, he seemed to have made a great decision and said, "This matter is Arshan family's fault. Second young master's words are wrong." Liao Meng smiled sweetly. What does this have to do with second young master? When the two families talked about this matter, you and I were only children. Now that my parents are no longer here, the words at that time were more of a joke and cannot be taken seriously. It's just that Zhou Mama dotes on me and wanted me to say it. Second young master must not blame her. Now that second young master already has a sweetheart, why should I be the person who breaks up a pair of affectionate ducks? So second young master must not say anything that is sorry. These words were really reasonable. If it was an ordinary woman, even if she did not make a fuss, she would still have some emotions on her face. At least, she would not be as easy to talk to as the woman in front of him. A trace of appreciation flashed through Jean Eyre's eyes. There seemed to be some gratitude and apology mixed together. It is me who has the heart of a lowly person trying to deceive the heart of a gentleman. But Miss Liao's illness has not recovered yet. At least give me a chance to find a doctor for Miss Liao. Liao Meng smiled again and the two of them talked about other topics. Jean Eyre had been following Xiao Xiao and had seen a lot of things. He also knew how to make a woman like him. Liao Meng's actions were even more unexpected. She did not have the narrow-mindedness of a woman and was also quite insightful. Moreover, her temperament was as gentle as water. The two of them actually chatted happily and did not realize that it was late. Until evening, Zhou Mama even stayed for dinner. After eating together, Jean Eyre returned to the Fu. Just as he returned to the Fu, Lu Zhu, who had finished doing embroidery, went to the kitchen to find something to eat. She happened to meet Jean Eyre and called out to him. Jean Eyre stopped and Lu Zhu walked over. She picked out 2 pieces of peony cake from the basket and handed it to him. Today, the small kitchen made new pastries. Young madam rewarded them and specially left 2 pieces for you. Eat them. Lu Zhu naturally smiled without any distractions. The peony cake emitted a special fragrance. Jean Eyre had just eaten. Zhou Mama's cooking skills were good and she also made Jiangnan dishes that he had not eaten for a long time. Naturally, he ate a little more and could not eat the pastries. He reached out to take it and smiled. Okay, I will go back to eat it later. It's just 2 pieces of pastries. Why are you going back to eat them? Lu Zhu curled her lips and said, don't tell me that you embroidered uniform guards rarely eat peony cake. Just eat it here. If you eat it when it's cold, your stomach will feel uncomfortable. Lu Zhu had good intentions. In fact, she said it unintentionally, but she had specially left these cakes for Jean Eyre. She wanted to see Jean Eyre eat them before she would be happy. Jean Eyre frowned and begged for mercy. Great aunt, I just ate outside. I really can't eat it now. It's better to wait until I return before eating it. Since Jean Eyre had said so, Lu Zhu naturally could not force him to eat it. She only looked a little depressed, but it disappeared in a flash. She said, where did you go today? Jean Yi and the others are all in the Fu. You ran out alone and even had dinner with someone. Could it be that you were in a brothel? She was originally joking, but Jean Eyre's expression changed slightly. He immediately laughed and said, "Nonsense. In any case, I am someone who is going to get married. Why would I go to a brothel? No matter how beautiful the young lady is, she still has to live with the ugly wife." Upon hearing this, Lu Zhu bristled and said, "Who are you calling ugly?" The two of them joked around for a while before Jean Eyre returned to his room. After Lu Zhu returned, her smile slowly disappeared. Seeing this, Lian Xiao even teased her, "I heard you and Jean Eyre joking from afar. Why, can't you leave now?" Lu Zhu did not speak. Lian Xiao thought that she was shy and did not pursue the matter. However, she did not notice that Lu Zhu was sitting alone in front of the bronze mirror. She stared at her palm in a daze and muttered to herself, "Why does it smell like orchids?" The days became busier and busier. The smile on Lu Zhu's face also seemed to slowly disappear. When Jiang Wan asked Lian Xiao about it, Lian Xiao also frowned and said, "I don't know what's wrong." Recently, she has been deeply worried, but indeed, there is nothing wrong. Most likely, the problem has something to do with Jean Eyre. Tianzhu also said, "Jean Eyre has been spending less time with her recently. Presumably, he is somewhat unhappy." Her own maidservants all said in unison that Lu Zhu was unhappy because she had not spent much time with Jean Eyre. Jiang Wan did not echo their words. If one were to say that these were the emotions that people would have before they got married, she did not have them before. If one were to say that she was really too special, with Lu Zhu's carefree temperament, she would definitely not appear to have a heavy heart because of this kind of thing. With Bai Ji as an example, Jiang Wan paid more attention to the emotions of her maidservants. However, Lu Zhu had followed her later and there was nothing wrong with her actions. When she asked her, it seemed that she was really like this because of Jean Eyre. It was not convenient for Jiang Wan to intervene in the matters between a young man and a young woman, so she could only let them be. If there was anything special, it would be that Governor Yao of Binhai, for some reason, once again had the idea of claiming kinship with Jinying Wangfu. Previously, after being warned by Xiao Xiao, Governor Yao had also given up on this idea. Recently, however, he had started to be active frequently. Naturally, he did not directly come to Jinying Wangfu to send an invitation, but he also understood the principle of using a roundabout way to save the country. Unexpectedly, he sent an invitation to Guan Lianghan, Mo Tsong, and the others. Xiao Xiao could reject Governor Yao's invitation without any misgivings, but Guan Lianghan and Mo Tsong could not. Firstly, they were all colleagues of the imperial court. Secondly, Guan Lianghan and Governor Yao had quite a lot of common topics on certain matters. They were all martial arts people who had fought hard battles. The Yao family was ready to make trouble, but Jiang Wan did not pay any attention to them. After she was done with Lu Zhu's matter, she was busy looking at Xian Pei's faction in the imperial court. Now, sooner or later, Xian Li would point his spear at Xian Pei. Whether Xian Pei was willing or not, he had already been involved in this struggle for power. Now, she could only rely on her memories from her past life to help Xian Pei select people to ensure Xian Pei's temporary safety. Xiao Xiao was even busier than she was. He had heard from Jin Si that the people of Nanjiang had already appeared in many places in the capital. It was unknown what the people of Nanjiang hiding in the capital were planning to do after changing their appearances. What he was afraid of was that they would sneak into the palace and collude with the imperial court. In reality, it was already an indisputable fact that the people of Nanjiang were colluding with the people of the imperial court. Jiang Wan was also well aware of who that person was. However, as of now, there was no evidence and it was not good to beat the grass and alert the snake. She could only take one step at a time. Now that the enemy was in the dark and she was in the light, there were many inconveniences. When the night was dark, Jean Eyre finally returned to the Fu under the light of a lantern. Lu Zhu was sitting in the room. When Jean Eyre walked in and saw her, he saw that she had not lit the lantern. He asked, why are you not lighting the lantern?" After saying this, he looked for a match to light the lantern. Jane Eyre, without waiting for him to find a match, Lu Zhu interrupted him and said, "Do you not want to marry me? What are you thinking about?" Jane Eyre was somewhat incredulous and had forgotten to light the lantern. He asked, "Why are you throwing a tantrum again? These days, you leave early and return late, so I have not been able to see you. Whenever you return, the time we talk has become especially rare. It's even worse than when I had just arrived at the Fu. You are always impatient, you. Great aunt, I've said it before. Master has given me a mission during the day and I can't accompany you all the time. I'm already very tired during the day and I don't want to listen to your unreasonable pestering." Jane Eyre frowned. It was unknown whether it was because he was really tired, but his brows were tightly knitted and his tone was not as gentle as before. I'm pestering. Lu Zhu's voice also became louder. She seemed to realize this herself and took a deep breath before she said, "I do not want to talk to you about this. I am not a fool. You are lying. The son-in-law did not give you any task." "I have already asked Jin-san." Her expression could not be seen clearly in the darkness, but Jane Eyre could not help but feel his heart tighten. For some reason, he felt that Lu Zhu's eyes were staring at him, causing him to feel uneasy. "No, listen to me." Jane Eyre wanted to say something else but Lu Zhu interrupted him and asked, "Jane Eyre, do you have someone outside?" Jane Eyre was stunned and immediately said angrily, "What nonsense are you spouting? You know best whether I am spouting nonsense or not." Lu Zhu's voice involuntarily became louder. She said, "You have not let me down. I have already said that I do not. Don't use this as a pretext to make a fuss." Jane Eyre had always treated women kindly. This was the first time he had spoken so harshly to Lu Zhu. The impatience in his tone made him seem like a completely different person from his usual self. Lu Zhu was not to be outdone and said angrily, "I use this as a pretext to make a fuss. Jane Eyre, don't treat everyone as idiots. Do you think it is fun to tease me? Although I am a servant girl, I cannot allow myself to be humiliated like this. If you regret it, you can tell His Highness to cancel this marriage. I, Lu Zhu, will definitely not object. I am not the kind of person who begs and pesters." Jane Eyre stood up abruptly. He could no longer suppress the anger in his voice as he said, "Cancel? You say it so lightly. What kind of person do you think I am? Get lost." Lu Zhu scolded and reached out to push him. However, there was no electric light in the room. She almost fell down when she pushed him. Immediately after, Jane Eyre snorted and turned to walk out of the door. He slammed the door shut fiercely. There was no sound in the room for a long time. After a long time, the door was pushed open and Lian Xiao's voice sounded, "Why didn't you light the lamp? It's so dark." She took out a match and lit the oil lamp. Only then did she see that there was someone sitting in the room. She said in a daze, "You are in the room. Why didn't you light the lamp, ah?" Lian Xiao cried out in surprise. She saw Lu Zhu, who was supposed to be cheerful, sitting in a daze in the room. Her face was full of tears and her eyes were red from crying. Outside the window, there seemed to be a figure silently fighting for a long time. He seemed to hesitate for a while and then walked away. In the courtyard on the other side, Zhou Mama looked at the girl in front of her, who looked much better than before. She said in surprise, "Can Miss really succeed by doing this? That second young master has never been a soft-hearted person. Don't worry." Liao Meng also smiled, "Men are all the same. They don't like noisy women. But women are very sensitive. After a while, there will always be a gap between two people." Chapter 222. Everyone in the prince's residence knew about Jane Eyre and Deju's quarrel the next day. This pair of daughter and daughter were originally quarrelsome lovers, so a quarrel was not a big deal. However, it was different this time. Jane Eyre bullied Dejeu until she cried, so the entire prince's residence was in an uproar. The members of the embroidered uniform guards were all on Lu Zhu's side. Lu Zhu had a sweet mouth but a kind heart. She was usually very likable. Jane Eyre was a man after all. If he bullied a little girl like Lu Zhu until she cried, it would definitely be his fault. Naturally, Butler Lin was enraged again. He dragged Jane Eyre over and interrogated him for a long time. Even Yifeng and Jin Wen talked to Jane Eyre for an unprecedented hour. Unfortunately, Jane Eyre remained silent from beginning to end and had no idea where to start. Everyone gradually began to worry about Dewdrop. However, Dewdrop was doing things as usual with a smile on her face. She seemed to be completely unaffected by this matter. However, the more Dewdrop acted like this, the more everyone believed that she had been wronged. This made their hearts ache even more. Although Jiang Wan did not like what Jane Eyre had said, it was indeed not appropriate for her to intervene in the affairs of her own subordinates. Lu Zhu had also repeatedly expressed that she did not need to worry about this matter. Jiang Wan did not know what else to say. That afternoon, Lu Zhu came over to discuss some matters with Jiang Wan. Auntie Zhang, who was in charge of purchasing, had left the Fu to look after her daughter-in-law, who was in charge of purchasing, as her daughter-in-law was pregnant and the fetus was affected. Thus, Lu Zhu wanted to personally go shopping. Seeing this, Lian Xiao said, yes, Nubi also wants to buy some things. Why don't Nubi go with Lu Zhu? Later on, we can also buy some snacks from Jade Shai for young madam. Tianzhu glanced at Dewdrop and did not speak. Jiang Wan understood. She thought that if she let Dewdrop and Lian Xiao go out, perhaps Dewdrop's mood would be better, so she agreed. After Lu Zhu and Lian Xiao left, Jiang Wan looked at the account book in front of her and suddenly asked Tianzhu, who was standing to one side, what happened to Jane Eyre. Tianzhu was slightly taken aback, and then a slightly embarrassed expression appeared on her face. I don't know either. You don't know either? Jiang Wan was somewhat flabbergasted. She immediately lowered her head and looked at the teacup in front of her as if deep in thought, this is rather strange. The streets of the capital were still very lively. The festivities brought about by the new year had not yet subsided. Some of the shops had not taken down their red lanterns, probably for good luck. In order to sell more things during this bustling time, the street vendors brought out countless novelty gadgets. Lian Xiao and Lu Zhu were maidservants of the Wang Fu, so Jiang Wan did not have a rule that forbade them from going out. However, there were many matters to attend to on a daily basis. Occasionally, they would go out to the palace or to other mansions. Most of the time, they would take a horse carriage. It was rare for them to have the opportunity to casually walk on the main street. What's more, on the surface, it was a purchase, but in fact, everyone knew that this was a special opportunity for Dewdrop to relax. Hence, Lian Xiao was not in a hurry to go to the shop to buy clothes. Instead, she pulled Lu Zhu along as they strolled leisurely on the street. Ever since Lu Zhu and Jane Eyre quarreled, Jane Eyre did not apologize to Lu Zhu. Instead, the two of them continued to fight coldly. This was very unusual. Although Lu Zhu did not say it, anyone with a discerning eye would know that Lu Zhu was definitely very upset. Along the way, Lian Xiao pulled Lu Zhu along and told her about the recent happenings in the capital, hoping to cheer her up a little. Although Lu Zhu was smiling, Lian Xiao had been with her for a long time. With one glance, she could tell that Lu Zhu's smile was also very forced. Immediately, Lian Xiao was at a loss as to what to do. As the two of them walked like this, Lu Zhu was not very interested. This was very rare for her, who was usually the most interested in novelty. Lian Xiao accompanied her in her sadness, but she could not help. Just when she was at a loss of what to do, she inadvertently saw a shop that sold sugar figurines. She pulled Lu Zhu with a smile and said, "Look, there's a shop selling sugar figurines. Let's go take a look. Lu Zhu was usually a glutton and loved these novelty gadgets. She had once worked as a waiter for an old man who sold sugar figurines. When she saw the sugar figurines, she felt very close to them and unconsciously smiled. Lian Xiao heaved a sigh of relief and pulled her forward. Sure enough, they saw a straw pillar in front of the person who set up the stall. On top of the pillar, there were all kinds of lifelike sugar figurines of various sizes. The sugar figurines gave off a fragrant and sweet smell. Lu Zhu smiled and took out a few copper coins from her sleeve. She said to the old man who made the sugar figurines, "Master, make me a guan gong." The sugar figurine master heard this and smiled. He said, "Sure." Then, he started to boil the sugar again. Lian Xiao saw that Lu Zhu seemed to have forgotten about the matter just now. She was slightly happy and said, "I also want a Chang Yi one." The sugar figurine master started to get busy. Out of boredom, Lian Xiao looked around her surroundings. When she saw a medicine shop, she suddenly froze. Caught off guard, she called out, "What?" Just as the words left her mouth, she suddenly realized something and quickly shut her mouth. Only Dewdrop still heard her and asked curiously, "What happened to you?" Lu Zhu followed Lian Xiao's gaze. Lian Xiao wanted to stop her, but it was too late. She saw Lu Zhu also froze on the spot. In an instant, her face became very pale. In the medicine shop in front, there was a short and plump woman talking to the shop's waiter. They were probably getting medicine. Behind the woman was a young lady. The young lady was wearing a moon-white embroidered orchid dress. She had a delicate and elegant appearance. With one look, one could tell that she was a young lady from a wealthy family. At this moment, she was talking to a young man beside her. The young man was handsome and had a slight smile on his face. When he turned around, he lowered his head slightly. The two of them seemed to be very close. That man was not a stranger to Lian Xiao and Lu Zhu. It was Jean Eyre. The short and plump woman took the medicine and said something to Jean Eyre. Jean Eyre smiled and the three of them left the medicine shop together. Lian Xiao knew that this was not good. Just as she was thinking about how to comfort Lu Zhu, she saw Lu Zhu's expression change and she suddenly rushed out. Just as the young lady and Jean Eyre left the medicine shop, they were suddenly blocked by Lu Zhu. Lu Zhu had a straightforward temperament and was never one who was used to forbearing. The lady was a little surprised at first and then asked, "Miss, why are you blocking in front of us?" Lu Zhu ignored the lady's words and only looked at Jean Eyre coldly. She said, "Now you won't say that I am being unreasonable." After Jean Eyre's shock subsided, he said in shock, "You have misunderstood. She and I don't care what relationship you have with her." Lu Zhu interrupted him loudly. She took a deep breath and said, "I'll have to trouble you to explain to His Highness. Just treat the marriage between you and me as a joke. Just treat the previous incident as if it never happened." "How can you say that?" "I already said it was a misunderstanding." Jean Eyre frowned. The lady at the side seemed to have noticed something and quickly said softly, "Miss, you have misunderstood. Second young master is only, what does the matter between the two of us have to do with you?" Lu Zhu turned her head and interrupted the lady's words. She had grown up in the streets and when she was angry, she did not care about anything. Her voice also became louder. It was the first time that the lady had met such a fierce person. She was startled and started coughing violently. The short and plump lady at the side quickly squeezed Lu Zhu to the side and said hurriedly, "Miss, are you all right?" "Ah, miss, your body has just gotten better. It's not easy for you to go out today. Don't let your old illness come back." Seeing this, Jean Eyre helped the lady up and asked, "Is Miss Liao all right?" The lady shook her head and said, "She's fine. I was careless." When Jean Eyre turned his head again, his attitude towards Lu Zhu was a little stiff. "Quickly apologize to Miss Liao." "Apologize for what?" Lu Zhu was unable to restrain her anger. Upon hearing this, she wished that she could tear Jane Eyre into pieces. That so-called Miss Liao was beautiful and polite. The more she thought about it, the more flustered she felt. However, she had to force back her tears. She sneered and asked, I don't even know what I've done wrong and I still have to apologize. Jane Eyre said angrily, you're still being unreasonable. How did you speak to her just now? Then how should I speak? Lu Zhu roared. Forget it, forget it. The lady hurriedly comforted, this lady did not mean it. Moreover, I am not hurt. Second young master does not have to do this for me. Your body has just recovered and you are already suffering such grievances. Moreover, she was rude in the first place. Jane Eyre helped the lady up and said, I am really sorry to have startled you. Dewdrop sneered, this is really strange. Could it be that I made her cough? This sickly body is also thanks to me. I didn't even know when I had such an ability. Even such a sin is placed on me. Before he could finish his sentence, he heard a crisp pa sound. Lian Xiao, who had just run over, was shocked. Without saying anything, she shielded Dewdrop behind her and said angrily, Jane Eyre, what are you trying to do? Jane Eyre stared blankly at his own hand, as if he could not believe that he was the one who had slapped Lu Zhu. Lu Zhu, who was being pulled behind Lian Xiao, was also in slight disbelief. She had originally said those words in a moment of anger. She was used to speaking straightforwardly and harbored enmity towards this lady. After she finished speaking, she felt some regret in her heart. She thought that she had said the wrong thing, but she did not expect that Jane Eyre would actually do it for that lady. Hit her. The lady's expression was originally somewhat gloomy, but upon seeing the situation, she became somewhat flustered. She said, Lady, second young master, sigh, you. Lian Xiao was filled with regret. Today, she had originally brought Lu Zhu along to relax, but she did not expect to encounter such an incident. Now, Lu Zhu could be considered to be truly heartbroken. She naturally stood on Lu Zhu's side and shared the same hatred for the enemy. Her gaze towards Jane Eyre was somewhat unfriendly. Just as she was about to throw out a few harsh words, Lu Zhu unexpectedly stood out from behind her. From the beginning until now, Lu Zhu had tried her best to control her emotions and did not shed a single tear. Even when Jane Eyre had slapped her, she still did not shed a single tear. At this moment, she seemed to have calmed down from her previous disbelief. She looked at Jane Eyre and said indifferently, very well, today, we can consider that we have nothing to do with each other. She then turned around and left, with Lian Xiao hurriedly following after her. Lu Zhu walked extremely quickly as she followed Jiang Ruan. Her usual manner and mannerisms were somewhat similar to Jiang Ruan's. The more one admired a person in one's heart, the more one would involuntarily imitate their actions. If Jiang Ruan were to encounter such a situation, she would most likely also strive for justice. After Lu Zhu and Lian Xiao left, Jane Eyre was about to chase after them when the short and plump woman beside him cried out in alarm, My lady, why is your complexion so pale? Could it be that your old illness has relapsed? Does lady feel well? When Jane Eyre heard these words, he hesitated for a moment before he finally put down his raised feet. He walked to the woman's side and said, Your complexion indeed does not look well. How about this, I will call for a physician. First, return to the residence to rest and let the physician take a look. When Lu Zhu returned to the Jiangfu, she returned to her own room without saying a word. Lian Xiao consoled her with a few words and thought that this matter could not be known by others. After all, there could be some misunderstanding. However, she should still inform Jiang Ruan, so she went to the study on her own. Jiang Ruan was in the middle of giving instructions to Tian Zhu when she saw that Lian Xiao had returned. She said, Why are you back so early? Since she had sent the two of them out to relieve their boredom, there was absolutely no reason for them to return so quickly. Lian Xiao was both embarrassed and angry. Before Lu Zhu could voice her grievances, she said, "Young Furen, Nubi was unable to complete the task of purchasing." Jiang Wan looked at her and asked, "What happened?" Lian Xiao had a bellyful of pent-up anger, so she immediately recounted the sequence of events. Previously, when she had seen Lu Zhu and Jin Er in a Cold War, Lian Xiao had thought that there must have been some misunderstanding. Perhaps Lu Zhu had wrongly accused Jin Er. However, now that she had personally witnessed Jin Er's actions, Lu Zhu could no longer stand on Jin Er's side. After she finished narrating the matter, she said, "No wonder elder Jin Er was not in the Fu. It was clearly not some prince who had ordered him to do something." When Lu Zhu said that Jin Er had someone outside, Nubi did not believe her. Now, it is clear that Jin Er had long been hiding a mistress outside. Bah, what a waste of such a good lady like Lu Zhu. After Jiang Wan heard Lian Xiao finish narrating the origin of the matter, she was also somewhat surprised. She frowned and asked, "What is the background of that Miss Liao?" Lu Zhu shook her head and said, "I couldn't tell. She looked educated and reasonable, like a young lady raised by a wealthy family. I don't know why she had the face to do such a shady business, seducing a man who was already married for no reason at all." After following Jiang Wan for so long, Lian Xiao had seen many people like Jiang Su Su and Jiang Dan who were used to acting gentle on the surface. Lian Xiao already had a prejudice against this type of woman. Coupled with the fact that she had bullied her own sister, Lian Xiao wished that she had gone up and kicked that woman twice. "Jin Er is not this kind of person," Tian Zhu suddenly said. Seeing Lian Xiao and Jiang Wan look over, she said seriously, "Although Jin Er's temperament is stubborn and mischievous, and he appears to be unruly on the surface, in reality, he is not a reckless person. Since he is engaged to Lu Zhu, he will not go and provoke others." Tian Zhu was usually cold and indifferent, and this was the first time that she had spoken up for Jin Er. However, Lian Xiao did not listen to her and said, "Tian Zhu, you don't know this. After all, you are a woman, and Jin Er is a man. Going from east to west, returning to the west at dusk, making love in the daytime. Ordinary men are unfaithful and heartless, but their way of thinking is different from that of women. Moreover, you did not see the scene today. Jin Er actually hit Lu Zhu for a woman. If it was really a misunderstanding, why would he hit his fiancée for another woman? Even if you said that there was no special relationship between the two of them, I'm afraid that no one would believe it." Lian Xiao's words were understandable, so Tian Zhu had nothing else to say. Jiang Wan frowned. She did not lose her sense of propriety because of Lian Xiao's words. Even though she was unhappy on behalf of Lu Zhu, she still noticed that something was amiss. She said, "Why would there be another woman out of the blue? Tian Zhu, think of a way to investigate the background of that woman. She actually dared to come so brazenly to snatch people from my people. She's a little too daring." Tian Zhu complied and left. After Tian Zhu left, Lian Xiao, who was full of grievances, could not help but ask, "Miss still believes that there is nothing wrong with Jin Er. Did Lu Zhu misunderstand? But this servant still feels that that woman is very hateful. Even an ordinary woman knows to keep a distance from a man with a family. Moreover, that person looks like a daughter of a noble family and knows the rules. How could she be so casual? Since you can see that the woman has ulterior motives, how can I not see it?" Jiang Ruan's gaze darkened as she said, "She actually used this method on my people. Very well, I also want to know who is causing trouble." She was all too familiar with this woman's methods. In her previous life in the palace, the women in the inner palace had many methods to compete for favor. These methods could not be considered very brilliant, but they almost always won. This was because men instinctively had tender feelings for the fairer sex. Once they saw the weaker party, they would definitely think of ways to take pity on them. Lu Zhu was straightforward, so it would not be advantageous to cross swords with such a woman. It would only irritate Jin Er. However, Jin Er and Lu Zhu were Jin Wang's people after all. who would have the guts to pick him? Jiang Wan lowered her eyes and calmly took a sip of tea. That night, Lian Xiao, who had been waiting to denounce Jin Eyre, guarded the door to Jin Eyre's room. Even Yi Feng, who came over to inquire, was scolded by her, causing Yi Feng to scratch his head in confusion. Unfortunately, that night, Jin Eyre did not return to the Fu. Lian Xiao was so angry that she almost wanted to tear Jin Eyre's room apart. In the end, Yi Feng tried every possible way to persuade Lian Xiao to return, but she had no choice but to give up. The next day, the weather was clear. Sunlight shone into the room through the window. It was a small room that was decorated neatly and elegantly. Although it was not very luxurious, it was still considered spacious. There was a faint fragrance of orchids in the air that made one feel comfortable. There was a man lying on the soft couch, and he was already sleeping soundly. After an unknown period of time, he woke up around the time the sunlight climbed onto his face. His clothes still carried a faint smell of alcohol. When he moved, the smell of alcohol immediately became a little stronger. Jin Eyre woke up the moment he opened his eyes. He sat up abruptly and saw a woman in disheveled clothes curled up in a corner of the soft couch. The woman covered her mouth, but she could not stop her soft sobs. Each sob was like a sudden clap of thunder that struck Jin Eyre's heart. At this moment, the door was suddenly pushed open. Zhou Mama walked in and said, "Miss, breakfast." Her voice stopped abruptly. She was stunned for a moment, as if she had been frightened. Then, she immediately turned around and ran out in silence, closing the door tightly behind her. However, the woman seemed to have finally snapped the last string in her brain. Her soft sobs suddenly became louder and she burst into tears. The dazed Jin Eyre came back to his senses. In his mind, there were only a few fragments from last night. He only remembered that after the Du left last night, he sent Liao Meng back to the Fu to find a doctor to take a look at her body. Later, his mood was really bad, so he went to a pub to drink. Who knew that he would be pulled back by Liao Meng midway? Liao Meng had just arrived in the capital and did not know where Jinying Wang Fu was, so she could only bring him back to the house that she temporarily lived in. After that, he did not remember what happened after that. However, right now, Jin Eyre looked at the wrinkled bedsheet and his heart jumped. Then, he saw the stains on the bedsheet and he could already guess what happened. "Miss Liao." He opened his mouth with difficulty. You don't have to say anything. Today, I will set off for Jiangnan. This time, we will pretend that we have never seen each other. This matter will be treated as if it never happened." Liao Meng finally stopped sobbing. After saying this, tears flowed out uncontrollably. As soon as she finished speaking, without waiting for Jin Eyre to reply, a figure suddenly rushed in from outside. It was no other person but Mother Zhou. As soon as she came in, she knelt straight in front of Liao Meng and cried, "Miss, why do you have to do this? If this is really the case, how do you want this old servant to explain to the deceased master and Furen?" She looked at Jin Eyre and kowtowed to Jin Eyre several times in one breath. She kowtowed so hard that her head started to bleed. Madame Zhou choked with sobs, "Second young master, this old servant is begging you. Please give our young lady a way out. After such a thing happened, how can Miss marry in the future? Even if she marries, how can she live well in other people's homes? With Mrs. Temper, if she does not say it now, I'm afraid that she will commit suicide after returning to the Fu. This old servant promised Master and Furen that I will raise Miss well. After such a thing happened, this old servant cannot absolve myself from the blame. Why don't second young master punish this old servant? This old servant is willing to use my life to exchange for Mrs. Way out." "Mother Zhou, what are you saying?" Liao Meng also cried. As she cried, she said, "What does this matter have to do with you? Don't say such words to hurt my heart. This matter has nothing to do with second young master. This is all a misunderstanding. My miss, How is this a misunderstanding? Mother Zhou cried even sadder than Liao Meng, you are my child who was raised by me. How can this old servant not know Mrs. Temper? Second young master, this old servant is begging you. I beg you to give our miss a way out. This old servant knows that second young master has a sweetheart, but that girl has a good appearance and was raised by Wang Fei. Without second young master, she will definitely be able to marry into a good family in the future, but if our miss leaves you, how will she marry? She cannot be compared to the miss by the princess's side. It's all this old servant's fault. It's all this old servant's fault for not taking good care of her. Second young master, look at our Mississippi. She is gentle and well-educated. Second young master will definitely like her. The master and the servant cried and talked at the same time. They were fighting to take the responsibility for themselves. Jin Er looked at Mother Zhou and Liao Meng in front of him in a trance. His mind was in a mess. His fingers suddenly touched something on his waist. He gradually woke up. It was a small sachet that Dezhu sewed for him. There were 2 small goldfish embroidered on it. It was very delicate and cute. He paused and slowly reached out to untie the sachet. He looked at Liao Meng and took a deep breath. He closed his eyes and said, this is all my fault. I take responsibility. I will immediately explain to mother and propose marriage to the Liao family. Chapter 223. There was a warning tone to her words. Her meaning was that if Jin Er really decided to cancel his engagement with Lu Zhu today, from then on, Jiang Yuan would never allow him to get close to Lu Zhu again. When Jin Er heard these words, he slowly lowered his head and fished out something from his sleeve. He clenched his fist and extended it in front of Lu Zhu. Liao Meng smiled, mother worries too much. That second young master Huang is clever and quick-witted. If not for his own reputation, how could he agree to this matter so easily? As for after the marriage, she seemed a little shy. I will be a good wife. Second young master is a good person and will live well with me. Naturally, these matters will not be investigated by others. Mother, do you think that my methods are too sinister? Liao Meng lowered her head and her voice became a little sad. Father and mother are already gone and those relatives are so covetous towards me. I have no other choice. If I miss out on a family like the Huang family, uncle and aunt will definitely marry me to the son of a rice merchant as a concubine. Mother, I don't want to be a concubine. That servant girl, since she is by the princess's side, she can always find a better one. Lian Xiao's eyes immediately reddened. Bai Ji and Lu Zhu had supported each other from the most difficult days. Lu Zhu was naturally naive and unaffected, so she also treated Lu Zhu as her own little sister. She saw with her own eyes how happy Dezhu was when she found out about the marriage, but now she heard from Jin Er's mouth that the marriage was cancelled. She felt sad for Dezhu and felt that it was not worth it. She wished she could go up and give Jin Er a good beating. She said, you have no conscience. Replying to young madam, I have investigated, but... She hesitated and heard Jiang Yuan say, tell me when you have. It was rare for Jiang Yuan to be so cold and stern. Clearly, the matter with Lu Zhu had made her very unhappy. Tian Zhu did not dare to hide it and immediately said it. However, this little bit of guilt was not enough to completely break the relationship between the two. Liao Meng slowly smiled and caressed the face of the woman in the bronze mirror. Does mother feel that something is wrong? Liao Meng smiled slightly. Compared to the panic in the morning, she now appeared very calm. If one looked carefully, one could even see a hint of happiness in the corners of her eyes. Young madam, this subordinate cannot marry Lu Zhu. Jin Er repeated himself. This time, his voice was firm and it rang clearly in everyone's ears. The marriage between Jin Er and Lu Zhu fell through and caused quite a storm in Jining Wangfu. On that day, the entire Wangfu was lifeless, as if it had sunk into trouble because of this matter. No one had thought that this was just the beginning. Ever since this matter, great waves surged up one after another in Jining Wangfu. After Jin Eyre and Lu Zhu left, Lian Qiao finally wiped her tears. Lu Zhu was wronged, so she cried fiercely and said, "This is too much, young mistress." On the other hand, Jin Eyre's expression was extremely ugly. Seeing this, Steward Lin only thought that Jin Eyre was feeling remorseful and guilty, so he did not know what to say. Jin Eyre's footsteps were swift and he left Steward Lin behind. Jin San and Jin Si surrounded him and looked at Jin Eyre with a baffled expression. Steward Lin sighed, "What is this all about?" Outside the door, Steward Lin and Jin San and Jin Si could not bear to watch and closed their eyes. They thought to themselves that Lian Qiao's glib tongue was really sharp. It was better not to provoke anyone but her. However, Lian Qiao's words seemed to have a different meaning. A young lady from a wealthy family? Who was she mocking? Could it be that Jin Eyre really had a lover outside? What's the matter? Lian Qiao stood up and asked. However, Jin Eyre's expression was even uglier than Steward Lin's and he seemed to be extremely exhausted. Steward Lin talked to him for almost an hour, but Jin Eyre's muddled gaze gradually became sober. He did not say anything and only glanced at Steward Lin before walking towards the study. Steward Lin was stunned for a moment and said, "Master has not returned to the Fu yet." "Young madam is inside." Lu Zhu took it. It was a small sachet with a goldfish pattern embroidered on it. She had wanted to obtain a good omen of a golden marriage, but now that the item had returned to its rightful owner, it had also cut off the last trace of hope between the two of them. Lu Zhu's eyes were still somewhat sparkling, but she quickly concealed her loss of composure with a smile. She kowtowed to Jiang Wan and said with a smile, "Thank you, young madam, for fulfilling my wish. Why did you suddenly break off the engagement? Isn't it because you want to marry someone else?" Jiang Wan said coldly, "What exactly happened last night?" "Tianzhu, go and investigate." Tianzhu could not see it because what the embroidered uniform guards did had nothing to do with the fight between the women in the courtyard. However, men could not see through a woman's hypocrisy, only a woman could. Even Lian Qiao, who had been by her side for a long time, could see that something was wrong. This woman's scheming was quite deep. Step by step, she had led Jin Eyre to this point. It was clear that it had been premeditated. In the end, she had become Lu Zhu's unreasonable troublemaker, completely removing herself from the matter. Lian Qiao had long hated that woman to the point of gnashing her teeth. Hearing this, she asked happily, "Does young madam want to vent Lu Zhu's anger?" Today, Jiang Wan did not let Lu Zhu wait on her. A fine young lady had cried until her eyes were swollen like peaches. Moreover, she was at the age of a flower, so her self-esteem was very heavy. After such a thing had happened, she felt very ashamed. How could she still walk around the Fu as if nothing had happened? Thus, only Tianzhu and Lian Qiao remained in the room. When she heard that Jin Eyre had arrived, Lian Qiao rolled her eyes in disdain. However, Jiang Wan acted as if she did not hear it and continued to write. She was deliberately giving Jin Eyre the cold shoulder. Jiang Wan was writing in the study when she suddenly heard someone knock on the door. Tianzhu glanced at it and said in a low voice, "Young madam, it's Jin Eyre." Jiang Wan slowly picked up her teacup and took a sip. Among everyone present, only her expression was the calmest. She looked coldly at Jin Eyre. Her gaze was actually somewhat similar to Xiao Xiao's. She asked, "Why?" Jiang Wan quietly looked at Lu Zhu for a long time before saying, "Lu Zhu, don't try to coax me." She spoke so solemnly that Lian Qiao wanted to speak up to stop her. After all, marriage was not a small matter that could be used in a fit of pique. However, on second thought, Jin Eyre was such a heartless person. How could she persuade him? It would be better if she did not speak up. The woman who had come to the capital to look for Jin Eyre was called Liao Meng. Before Jin Er followed Xiao Xiao, he was the second young master of the Huang family in Jiangnan. When old master Huang passed by Dingxi, he had a period of fate with the Liao family in Dingxi. At that time, Huang Furen had just given birth to Jin Er, and Liao Madam had also given birth to Liao Meng. Feeling that it was fate, it just so happened that old master Huang and old master Liao had gotten drunk that day. Thus, they had decided on a child betrothal. However, later on, old master Huang had returned to Jiangnan and had forgotten about this matter. For more than 20 years, they had not had any contact. Who knew that Liao Meng would suddenly come knocking on their door? The marriage between you and Lu Zhu must be discussed between the two of you. Does Lu Zhu know about your actions? Does she agree to it? Jiang Ruan's tone was gentle, but her gaze was incomparably sharp. Jin Er met her gaze, but for a moment, he did not know how to respond. Just as he was silent, he heard a clear and melodious voice coming from behind him. Of course, I know. Jin Er kowtowed to Jiang Ruan and said in a heavy tone, it is this subordinate who has wronged Lu Zhu. This marriage, let's forget about it. Jin Er half knelt, lowered his head and said, this subordinate has sinned. Master, please punish me. She slowly sat down in front of the dressing mirror. The woman in the mirror had the countenance of a flower and the countenance of the moon. With one look, one could tell that she was the daughter of a noble family who had been pampered. If one did not look out for oneself, heaven and earth would destroy them. If her parents were still alive, she indeed would not be so obsessed with Jin Er. Lian Xiao placed her hand on her chest and took a deep breath. She said, don't say these words to scare people, you. Sai, let's follow them and take a look. I'm afraid that Jin Er has also lost his head for a moment. Steward Lin sighed and followed. This servant does not dare to deceive young Furen. Lu Zhu said calmly. Her expression was magnanimous and her tone was crisp, somewhat similar to Jiang Ruan when she encountered trouble. She said, this servant's previous marriage was all thanks to young Furen's help. Now that our relationship has ended, naturally, we should part on good terms. Since Jin Er has taken the initiative to propose it, it just happens to go along with this servant's wishes. This is precisely the principle of parting on good terms. It's just that to ask young Furen to fulfill this request again, this servant is terrified. This matter has nothing to do with Jin Er. It's just that this servant and he do not have the affection of husband and wife. Young Furen, this subordinate cannot marry Lu Zhu. Without waiting for Steward Lin to finish speaking, Jin Er's voice rang out in the room. On the afternoon of the second day, Jin Er finally entered the Fu under the watchful eyes of everyone. When Steward Lin saw him return, he was so angry that he stomped his feet. Although he did not know what had happened, for a young lady like Lu Zhu, who was always smiling, to stay in the room and shed tears for a whole night, Jin Er was really too much of a bastard this time. Although Lian Xiao did not say anything, the handprint on Lu Zhu's face was obvious to everyone. Those with discerning eyes could always guess what had happened. Although it was somewhat unbelievable, they could not help but think about it. So when Jin Er returned, Steward Lin immediately spilled out the words that he had kept to himself for the whole night. Tian Zhu said, when that young Miss Liao first came to the capital, she met Jin Er once. Jin Er also explained clearly that he was already engaged to Lu Zhu. Young Miss Liao was also very understanding. However, the physician here said that it was not advisable to travel on a long journey, so young Miss Liao said that she would return to Jiangnan after she had recovered. When Zhou Mama heard this, she was extremely distressed and said, "My miss, do not say such words that make people sad. If Master and Furen were still here, why would they allow Miss to use your own reputation as a prelude? This old servant knows that Miss has no choice. That second young Master Huang is also a man. After Miss and second young Master get married, with Miss temperament and appearance, no man would dislike you. Naturally, your days will get better and better. This old servant has thought too much. Young Miss, please do not blame me. Tianzhu also looked towards the door and saw Lu Zhu walking in from outside. She had changed into a clean set of clothes and the delicate pink color made her complexion look brighter. Her eyes were still slightly red and swollen under the disguise of makeup, but her expression was incomparably calm. She walked in and knelt down by Jane Eyre's side. She kowtowed to Jiang Yuan and said, "This servant earnestly requests young Furen to cancel the engagement with Jane Eyre." The servant girl stopped abruptly, looked at Lu Zhu, and shut her mouth. Immediately, Lian Xiao was alarmed. She pretended to unintentionally walk over and pull the young servant girl up, saying, "I will go out with you to take a look. Lu Zhu, help me look after the embroidered handkerchief." Lian Xiao turned her head away, but she could not stop her tears from falling. If an ordinary person saw this, one could imagine what Lu Zhu was thinking. Jiang Yuan said indifferently, "All right, as you wish." She then looked at Jane Eyre and said indifferently, "I hope that you will not regret it in the future." Although her words were gentle, each and every one of them was unyielding, and there was not the slightest bit of leeway in her words. Jiang Yuan lowered her eyes so that no one could see her gaze clearly. She only slowly touched the lid of the white porcelain teacup and said, "Since the two of you have already discussed it, I naturally have no room to say anything else." However, after this engagement was cancelled, just as Lu Zhu said, there is no longer any fate between husband and wife. Everything that happened in the past is just an illusion, and from then on, you will be strangers, each getting married and having children. In the future, when you think about it in your old age, it will just be a joke. Her words were cold and cruel, causing the hearts of those present to tremble involuntarily. Yes, they originally had the opportunity to become the closest people, but in the end, it was just a big dream. Each had their own marriage. On the surface, it seemed that there was no big deal, but every time they thought about it in the future, it would be a painful matter. Especially for these two, anyone with a discerning eye could see that they had invited each other. Jiang Yuan gently placed the teacup on the table. In the midst of the silence, the sound of her action was like a thunderclap that struck everyone's heart. Then, what was even more important was her words. She asked, "Jane Eyre, have you thought it through?" On this day, Lian Xiao and Lu Zhu were doing embroidery in the courtyard. After a few days of persuasion, Lu Zhu had finally returned to her former self. At least on the surface, she did not seem to be sad anymore. As long as she took the first step, the future would be easy. As Lu Zhu and Lian Xiao were talking, they saw a third-rank maid sweeping the outer courtyard hurriedly run in, shouting, "Not good, not good. Does he want to apologize to young Madam and Lu Zhu? I'm afraid it won't be that easy." Jean San muttered. Liao Meng smiled and said a few more words to Zhou Mama. Zhou Mama then went back into the room to brew medicine. After Zhou Mama left, Liao Meng then returned to the room. The pot of orchids in the middle of the room was in full bloom. In this kind of weather, orchids were very difficult to raise, and it was rare to see one in such good bloom. Liao Meng gently stroked the petals of the pot of orchids. The petals emitted an extremely tempting fragrance, as if smelling it too much would make one's mouth dry. Jiang Yuan continued to ignore him and continued to write stroke by stroke. The room was completely silent and no one spoke. Even Steward Lin and Jean San and Jean Si, who had rushed to stand outside the room, did not dare to speak. Anyone could see that Jiang Yuan was deliberately giving Jane Eyre the cold shoulder. However, when they thought about it, it was understandable. After all, Lu Zhu was Jiang Yuan's personal maidservant. Being insulted like this was equivalent to slapping her face. Although Jiang Yuan usually looked cold, she was actually a very protective person. Zhou Mama looked at Liao Meng and hesitated to speak a few times. Finally, she could not help but ask, "Miss, is it really okay for us to do this?" Jean San and Jean Si were already frowning, but they could not go in and speak rashly. Steward Lin, on the other hand, was so angry that he stamped his feet and kept scolding Jane Eyre for being a blockhead. This old servant just feels that it is too serious to tarnish Mrs. reputation. Moreover, if second young Master Huang finds out about this in the future, how will Miss clean up the mess? Miss, please don't blame this old servant for thinking too much. After all, Miss was raised by this old servant, and this kind of thing is something that I cannot not worry about. In the courtyard in the east of the city, the woman who had been crying uncontrollably in the morning had now changed into a clean set of clothes. The light yellow embroidered orchid cotton padded skirt was not too extravagant, but it was elegant enough to show off the woman's slim waist. If it were not for the short and plump woman's worried expression, all of this could be considered beautiful. Lu Zhu did not suspect anything and nodded in agreement. When they walked out of the courtyard, Lian Xiao asked, "What happened?" She faintly guessed that this matter had something to do with Lu Zhu. The little servant girl's mouth flattened as if she was about to cry. Lian Xiao Jijie, something has happened. Outside, there are rumors that Lu Zhu Jijie used young madam's power to seduce someone else's fiancé. It is indeed a little too arrogant. Jiang Wan looked indifferently at the corner of her sleeves and suddenly smiled. To use these methods on my people, they are indeed not afraid of death. Such a cold tone. Jean Eyre maintained his half-kneeling position and said in a low voice, "Young madam, this subordinate is here regarding Lu Zhu." "I do not know about Lu Zhu, only Lian Xiao knows." Jiang Wan said indifferently. Chapter 224. These days, Jinying Wangfu had become even more depressing. It was even more desolate than before Jiang Wan married into the family. Every servant's face always carried a bit of worry. If one did not know the reason, they would have thought that something big had happened to Jinying Wangfu. However, the truth was that something big had indeed happened to Jinying Wangfu. Although Jinying Wangfu, Xiao Xiao, usually acted in a low-key manner, he could not resist his high-profile appearance. His life experience was also quite ostentatious. Whenever there was a disturbance, it would always quickly spread throughout the capital. What's more, this matter was not a trivial matter of catching cats and playing with dogs. Once it was related to romance, people's interest would be aroused. If there was also the addition of bullying, then it would be the top topic of discussion in the teahouses. Lu Zhu probably did not expect that in her lifetime, she would become the topic of discussion in the streets and alleys. However, this matter could not be considered a good thing. The people of the capital all said that Jinying Wangfei, Jiang Ruan, was really not a soft persimmon. Initially, she was an unfavored daughter, but she became Hong and Junju, personally recognized by Empress Dowager Yi De. Then, she married into Jinying Wangfu. In the end, she even sued her own biological father. Her methods were really tough. They did not expect that the maidservant by her side would not be outdone. Indeed, Xiao Wangye had a capable subordinate who was already engaged to someone else in his hometown. However, the maidservant by Wang Fei's side had taken a fancy to this imperial bodyguard and had Wang Fei make the decision to ask for a marriage. Now that the imperial bodyguard's fiancé had come knocking on his door, that imperial bodyguard was indeed a person who valued friendship and righteousness. He refused to yield to Wang Fei's pressure and still cancelled the engagement with the maidservant. He wanted to fulfill his promise and marry a girl from his hometown. People always followed what others said, especially when everyone preached. In the end, it was already beyond recognition. It was a vivid image of an evil tyrant who had taken a fancy to a good girl and wanted to force her to buy and sell. It was just that the male and female were reversed. In the end, Lu Zhu's image in everyone's mouth was a vulgar and unreasonable ugly woman. That Liao family's young miss was actually gentle and considerate, beautiful and generous. When this news spread to Jinying Palace, everyone was furious. Lu Zhu usually treated everyone very well, so she was slandered for no reason. But now, everyone in the capital was talking about this. Even if she clarified, no one would listen. If she wanted to protect her and teach those gossiping people a lesson, she really couldn't do it. When Jiang Wan heard this, she did not say anything. She only let Tian Zhu continue to pay attention to the movements of the Liao family's young lady. As for Lu Zhu, after hearing these words, she laughed it off. Perhaps it was because the impact of this matter on her was so great that she seemed to have matured quite a bit overnight. Her actions were also much more stable. However, the originally carefree and easygoing girl had become like this. In the eyes of the crowd, it was not good to see such a scene. As for Jean Eyre, perhaps he felt that he did not have the face to see the dewdrops or something else. He became more and more unwilling to stay in the Wang Fu. He also gradually became taciturn, almost becoming the second Jean Yi. From housekeeper Lin's mouth, it seemed that he had already written a letter back to his hometown to discuss with his parents about his marriage with the Liao family's young lady. As for the details, he did not know. Lian Xiao cried out for Lu Zhu's injustice. She looked for Jean Eyre once and scolded him for having no conscience. That Liao family's young lady was also not a good person, splashing dirty water on Lu Zhu for no reason. After all, Lu Zhu was still an unmarried girl. Originally, the matter between her and Jean Eyre was only known by her own people in Jinying Palace. Now that it was spread out, it was easy to imagine how big of an impact it would have on Lu Zhu's reputation. In the future, it would be very difficult for Lu Zhu to find a good family. Jean Eyre silently listened to Lian Xiao's scolding and said that this matter was definitely not done by Liao Meng. He would definitely find out who was behind this and give Lu Zhu an explanation. He was not willing to say anything else. Lian Xiao was anxious and said that she would wait for Jean Eyre to find out who was behind this. On this day, there was a rare sunny day in River East. There was a faint smell of early spring. In the tea house, the waiter was running back and forth to serve tea to the guests. It was afternoon and the guests were eating melon seeds while chatting about the rumors in the capital. I heard that the princess's maid, Lu Zhu, is also a domineering person. Not long ago, I heard that the imperial bodyguard had already discussed his marriage with his original fiancé in his hometown. That maid even made a big fuss in front of the princess. From what I see, this matter is not over yet. A thin man wearing a felt hat said mysteriously. On the other hand, the fat man who was talking to him said, "You don't understand. Before you hit a dog, you have to look at its owner. No matter how bad that maid is, she is still the princess's maid." Naturally, the princess would be biased towards the person in front of her. However, such a thing happened out of the blue. I heard that the young lady is from a big family and is also a reasonable person. Such a beautiful and gentle lady, how could she meet such a troublesome servant? Sigh, the heavens are really blind. These days, good people don't have good karma. Jiang Wan rolled her eyes at him and told Xiao Xiao everything that had happened in the Fu these past few days. When Xiao Xiao was busy, he left early in the morning and returned late at night. Even if there was a genie guard to report to him, it was also related to the imperial court's official business. How could he talk about these matters of love? Therefore, he really did not know about these matters regarding Jean Eyre and Lu Zhu. In the end, Jiang Wan said, "What do you plan to do now?" "What do I plan to do?" Xiao Xiao's brows furrowed even tighter. He really had never interfered with his subordinates' domestic affairs. He looked at Jiang Wan and asked, "What do you want to do?" "Your own subordinates, naturally you discipline them yourself." Jiang Wan pretended to hit him, "No matter what, he bullied my people, so he bullied me. Leave Miss Liao's matter to me. As for Jean Eyre, you better give him a warning. This matter will not end so easily." Xiao Xiao stroked her hair and pulled her into his arms, coaxing her, "Okay, I will find an opportunity to warn him. However, Wan, Jean Eyre has been with me for many years. He has a sense of propriety. Miss Liao, don't act rashly. This matter should be a misunderstanding." Jean Eyre had been with Xiao Xiao for many years. Xiao Xiao was also a protective person. Since Jin Air was this person, Xiao Xiao would definitely protect him. Jiang Ruan was disinclined to argue with him. However, she was still somewhat unhappy in her heart, so she said a few more words to Xiao Xiao before letting it go. However, Xiao Xiao had said that he would warn Jin Air on another day. Before that time arrived, another incident occurred. The next day, Lu Zhu was carrying a new medicinal cuisine that she had just instructed the small kitchen to prepare for Jiang Ruan. After carefully giving instructions, she prepared to return to the courtyard. Lian Xiao was in the study serving Jiang Ruan. Lu Zhu had just entered the small courtyard when she heard the gatekeeper hurriedly running over to inform her, "Lu Zhu Jijie, there is a young lady outside looking for you." Young lady? Lu Zhu was stunned. What young lady? The gatekeeper scratched his head and said, "I don't know either. She looks very unfamiliar." However, that young lady said that she is Lu Zhu Jiejie's friend. She does not look like a bad person. Lu Zhu Jiejie, please go and take a look. Although Lu Zhu did not know how she could be acquainted with someone in the capital, she thought that it would not be good if she was delayed by some urgent matter. Thus, she patted her skirt and said, "Okay, I will go and take a look." When she arrived at the entrance of the residence, she saw that there was indeed a lady dressed in blue standing at the entrance. She had the appearance of a willow branch swaying in the wind. Her features were elegant. Even if she had been burnt to ashes, Lu Zhu could still recognize her. She was none other than the young lady of the Liao family, Liao Meng. Although Lu Zhu looked calm on the surface these past few days, how could she not feel wronged and angry when such a big pot of dirty water was splashed on her? Originally, she had a temperament that could not bear to be wronged. These days, she was afraid that everyone would be worried, so she had to force a smile. Now that she saw Liao Meng, the anger in her heart was immediately aroused. Everyone said that the person who spread the rumors behind the scenes had not been investigated clearly. Perhaps it was not this young lady of the Liao family. However, from Lu Zhu's point of view, even if it was not Liao Meng who spread those slanderous words, it was still because of her. Immediately, the smile on her face disappeared. She looked at Liao Meng and said coldly, "What are you doing here?" I am here to apologize to Miss Lu Zhu." Liao Meng didn't seem to expect that Lu Zhu would change her face so quickly. For a moment, she was a bit scared. However, perhaps she was a young lady from a big family, so she quickly recovered her calmness. She bowed to Lu Zhu and said, "These days, I have also heard the rumors outside. Liao Meng is deeply frightened. After all, this is all because of me." If Liao Meng had not done something wrong, Miss Lu Zhu and the second young master would still be a couple. Liao Meng. It is all Liao Meng's fault. You flatter me. Lu Zhu said coldly. Liao Meng thought for a moment, then suddenly reached out and untied her purse. She took out a thick stack of banknotes from the purse. She looked at Lu Zhu and said, "I am the one who ruined your marriage. In this life, I don't ask for your forgiveness. This banknote is the only thing I can do for you. You take it." That thick stack of banknotes was about 2 taels of silver. Lu Zhu was startled at first, but after listening to her words, she suddenly turned around. The expression on her face was already very angry. To her, this was an undisguised humiliation. Although she was a servant, in all fairness, Jiang Ruan had never treated her like other masters would treat their servants. Lu Zhu had always been very comfortable at Jiang Ruan's side. From the time she followed Jiang Ruan until now, this was the first time she had suffered such humiliation. She took a deep breath, and instead of being angry, she smiled and said, "You really are a young lady from a big family. The rules of this apology are complete, but to only take out this little bit of sincerity, it is rather too stingy." Liao Meng was startled, and then said, "Miss Lu Zhu, I have come to the capital. This is all the money I have. If Miss Lu Zhu feels that it is not enough, then..." Liao Meng was stunned, and then slowly bent her knees and knelt down. A beautiful and magnanimous young lady kneeled down in front of a young lady dressed as a servant girl in front of Jining Wang Fu. The crowd could not help but think of the earlier rumors. In addition, there were already people watching from the side. Although they were not clear about what was said, but they could see that the young lady had an aggrieved expression and the servant girl was aggressive. Immediately, someone scolded, "Ai, this young lady is really pitiful. This servant girl is really taking advantage of her position to bully others. How can she be so aggrieved? A good young lady has to kneel down in front of others in the middle of the street." Yes, yes, yes. I just saw that young lady give her some money. Look at that thick stack of banknotes. This is accepting other people's money, yet she still wants them to kneel. This is really too cruel. A woman said. From what I can see, this must be the servant girl who was at Jining Palace's Wang Fei's side a few days ago. This young lady who is kneeling should be the imperial bodyguard's fiancée. Indeed, seeing once is better than hearing 100 times. This servant girl is really as unreasonable as others say. That young lady is a pitiful one. Ai, a pitiful young lady, what kind of misfortune has she caused? Standing a few meters away from the courtyard, Lian Qiao and Jiang Yuan watched from afar. These few days, Jiang Yuan had instructed that if anyone came looking for Lu Zhu, they should immediately report to her. When they heard that someone was looking for Lu Zhu, Lian Qiao and Jiang Yuan came over to take a look. As expected, they saw this scene. Lian Qiao was extremely angry. Although she could not hear what the two of them were talking about, she knew what the young lady was thinking from her actions. Now that the people outside were all pointing and gossiping about Lu Zhu would definitely not suffer in silence. Thinking of this, Lian Qiao looked at Jiang Yuan and said anxiously, "Young mistress, how long do we have to wait?" This time, Lu Zhu is being bullied badly. Lian Qiao did not know why Jiang Yuan, who had already arrived, did not say a word and did not even go forward to support Lu Zhu. She only heard Jiang Yuan say faintly, "Let her remember. Lu Zhu is innocent by nature. Since this matter is unavoidable, she should use this opportunity to see some things clearly. In this world, there are some women who are cruel and ruthless. They only do evil on the surface. This kind of person is easy to deal with. However, there are some women who are used to being gentle. The more vicious the methods, the more pure and kind they appear on the surface. Lu Zhu will inevitably encounter a fight between women in the future. She has to experience it so that she will not be blinded by this kind of beautiful knife in the future." After hearing this, Lian Qiao did not say anything and stood silently at one side. This was the first time Lu Zhu encountered such a situation. In the past, she had always had Jiang Yuan by her side. This was the first time she encountered a person who was used to playing tricks like Liao Meng. The surrounding people looked at her as if they were looking at an evil person. Lu Zhu felt very wronged. If it was in the past, she would have swallowed this insult for the sake of the prince's residence. However, looking at Liao Meng's sincere and remorseful expression, she felt like she was the victim. The anger in her heart rose. Thinking about it again, if Jiang Yuan were to encounter such a situation, she would definitely not swallow this insult. Since the outside world said that she was a bully, she could not bear this bad reputation for nothing. Before the crowd could react, Lu Zhu quickly walked to the kneeling Liao Meng and raised her hand. Pa, 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 3 crisp sounds were heard. Immediately, clear fingerprints appeared on Liao Meng's face. Outside, the servants who had been instructed by Jiang Yuan not to go out saw Lu Zhu's violent means and were dumbstruck. Lian Qiao was also a little surprised. Lu Zhu's mouth was very sharp, but she had always been a person who used her mouth and not her hands. Such a delicate and pretty little girl had been slapped 3 times without even blinking her eyes, causing everyone to be dumbfounded. However, Jiang Yuan could not help but laugh. Her eyes also carried a bit of admiration. Liao Meng did not expect Lu Zhu to act so quickly. She was also stunned by Lu Zhu's slaps and forgot what she was going to do next. However, Lu Zhu looked at her and smiled. I originally thought that although this matter was caused by you, perhaps you were not a bad person. It was just a coincidence. Now that I saw you kneel, I understand that I was wrong. How can there be such a rude and lowly person like you? It seems that I am not the only one who uses this method to bully others. You still boast that you are from a noble family. Bah, I am going to laugh my head off. The one I hit today is you. I will also seek justice for those young ladies who have been bullied by you all these years. Lu Zhu. Just as she finished speaking, she heard Jin Er's voice. He was also shocked by the scene in front of him. Almost without hesitation, he walked to Liao Meng's side and helped her up. He angrily said, "How can you randomly hurt people? Apologize. Apologize my ass." Dewdrop casually scolded, "Don't do things more than 3 times. I told you long ago, don't treat everyone as a fool. At that time, you slapped me once. Now that I have slapped her 3 times, it is not a loss." Lu Zhu really had the talent to be a playboy. Her words made Jin Er somewhat speechless. The disdainful expression on her face was even more surprising. It was as if she was a completely different person from her usual self. Liao Meng pushed away Jin Er's hand and smiled at Lu Zhu. Miss Lu Zhu's heart is full of resentment. No matter how you treat me, I deserve it. Even if it is a slap, I can bear it. What did I do to you? Lu Zhu originally turned around and was about to leave. Chapter 225. After Lu Zhu followed Jiang Yuan back to her room, she still stood at the side without moving. After a long time, Jiang Yuan raised her head, and Lu Zhu's eyes suddenly reddened. In a low voice, she said, "Nubi was wrong, please punish me, young Furen." "What's wrong?" Jiang Yuan looked at her and asked. Lian Xiao moved her lips but didn't say anything in the end. Lu Zhu said, "Nubi should not have quarreled with people at the entrance of the Wang Fu. For no reason, the Wang Fu has become the laughingstock of others." Jiang Yuan shook her head. "You're wrong, but that's not where you're wrong. Your mistake was that you were too polite to that woman from the beginning. I thought that after following me for so long, you would be able to see through people's hearts. I didn't expect you to still be too upright, but I can't blame you." Jiang Yuan lowered her eyelids. Since that person dared to cause a ruckus at the entrance of the Wang Fu, it can be assumed that he has nothing to fear. He most likely has a backup plan. Don't go out these few days. Leave this matter to me. These words made Lu Zhu want to cry again. The grievances she had suffered over the past few days had been hidden in the bottom of her heart, but Jiang Yuan's words seemed to have given her a pillar of support in an instant. Jiang Yuan had always been a very protective person. At that time, she could not tolerate anyone saying a bad word about Jiang Xing. Now, she was similarly protective of her. It was as if with Jiang Yuan around, the original sadness was no longer as bad. She paused for a moment before saying hesitantly, "This matter. Would it cause conflict between young madam and the embroidered uniform guards?" No matter how wrong Jin Er was, he was still a member of the embroidered uniform guard, just like how Yan Xiao stood by her side unconditionally. Jiang Yuan had humiliated Jin Er in front of everyone, so it was inevitable that the embroidered uniform guard would not think too much about it. It might even cause a misunderstanding between Xiao Xiao and Jiang Yuan. "Don't worry," Jiang Yuan smiled slightly, "there is absolutely no reason for a subordinate to be prejudiced against a master. If it were not for the sake of Jin Er's face today, I would have already sent people to beat them out." Dewdrop said nothing more. Outside the Fu, Jin Er helped Liao Meng into a carriage on the side. Zhou Mama was in the carriage, and Liao Meng didn't allow her to get out. Zhou Mama also didn't know what had happened outside. When she saw Jin Er, she was stunned at first, but then she saw the palm print on Liao Meng's face. She immediately jumped in fright and said in a fluster, "Oh, my young lady, what happened to you? Who beat him up? Oh my God, this area is so swollen. Miss, why don't you let me follow you?" Jane Eyre was slightly ashamed and could only say, "It's all my fault. I didn't take good care of Miss Liao. This has nothing to do with you." Liao Meng interrupted him anxiously and said to Mrs. Zhou, "Mrs. Zhou, I'm fine. It was just a misunderstanding. Second young master, you should go to do your own things first. The affairs in the prince's mansion are complicated. It's not a solution for you to accompany me all the time. It's still early now. I think you have something important to do. I will go back with Mrs. Zhou." Jane Eyre thought for a moment, then said, "You're a weak girl, what if something happens on the road? Coming to the imperial residence today is already a risk, it's better for me to send you off." "You really don't have to," Liao Meng said with a smile, "besides, Miss Lu Zhu has misunderstood just now. If you send me like this, it will make the knot in their hearts deeper and deeper. It doesn't matter. The coachman knows the way. Mrs. Zhou and I won't make any mistakes in broad daylight. But second young master, if you make Princess unhappy, will it affect you in front of Prince Yu? Thinking about it, I feel that it's all my fault today. I always give you trouble." Her words were said in a gentle and tactful manner. It made others not know how to respond. Jane Eyre's expression changed. He said, "I said that this has nothing to do with you. You don't have to worry about it. Since that's the case, I will leave and come back to the residence to see you later. You and Mrs. Zhou must be careful on the road." Liao Meng nodded in agreement. She smiled and put down the curtain of the carriage. The crowd of onlookers had already dispersed. Jane Eyre then mounted the horse and galloped in the opposite direction. In the carriage, Mrs. Zhou caressed Liao Meng's face with heartache. "Miss, that Yahuan is too ruthless. This red mark will take a few days to disappear. She's really a ruthless person. How can second young master want such a woman?" Once her hand touched her skin, she felt a burning pain. Lu Zhu had indeed used a lot of strength. At this moment, half of Liao Meng's face was swollen and it was almost impossible to see her original face. Liao Meng gritted her teeth and said, "I didn't expect her to be such a ruthless person." Her original plan today was to target Lu Zhu. Originally, she had already put on this weak posture and played the sympathy card. A person with a shallow mind like Lu Zhu would only be at a disadvantage. However, she didn't expect that this girl, who looked honest, was actually a shrew. These 3 slaps had almost stunned her. She didn't expect that she would suffer such a loss today. However, what made Liao Meng's heart palpitate was the woman in red who walked out of the entrance of the Wang Fu. She was the current young madam of Jinying Wang Fu, Jiang Ruan. Long before she came, she had already inquired about Jiang Ruan. She knew that this woman was astute and powerful. She didn't want to see it with her own eyes today. However, Lian Xiao now found the brocade guards to be an eyesore. Therefore, when she saw him, she didn't have a good expression. Not only did the relationship between the servants become subtle, but the relationship between Xiao Xiao and Jiang Ruan also became somewhat subtle. Xiao Xiao was already very busy today, so the two of them didn't have much time to meet. Moreover, such a vexing matter had occurred in the Fu. In any case, Jane Eyre was still Xiao Xiao's subordinate. Xiao Xiao did not punish Jane Eyre for his family matters. However, Jiang Ruan was a person who couldn't tolerate sand in her eyes. Based on her temperament, it was impossible for her to quarrel with Xiao Xiao. Therefore, her attitude had imperceptibly become somewhat cold. Xiao Xiao didn't seem to notice this. Women were always more sensitive. Unknowingly, some estrangement and alienation had arisen. On this day, Lu Zhu was teaching a few new servant girls who had just entered the courtyard to sweep some things to pay attention to. Suddenly, she heard the young servant girl's cries of alarm. Before she could understand what was going on, she saw a black shadow striding over. When it arrived in front of her, she felt a sharp pain in her wrist. Someone was gripping her wrist so tightly that it hurt. She raised her head and a familiar face entered her eyes. It was Jane Eyre. However, this Jane Eyre's face was not like the usual frivolous grin that always hung on his face. He was also not as silent and speechless as before. At this moment, the expression on his face was somewhat angry and somewhat disappointed. Before Lu Zhu could open her mouth, Jane Eyre spoke first. "Why did you do that?" This question was asked without rhyme or reason, causing Lu Zhu to be somewhat at a loss for a moment. However, when Jane Eyre put on an attitude of denouncing her, her anger soared. She immediately roared back, not to be outdone, "What do you mean by what? Why did you act like a mad dog and randomly bite people in broad daylight?" Jane Eyre grabbed her hand and refused to let go. He gritted his teeth and said, "This matter started because of me. I have wronged you. However, how could you be so vicious as to let someone do that to Liao Meng? Let go of me." Lu Zhu's hand hurt from his grip. In a fit of anger, she bit Jane Eyre's wrist. Jane Eyre loosened his grip due to the pain and Lu Zhu took the opportunity to struggle free. Immediately, a red and swollen mark appeared on her slender wrist. Lu Zhu angrily said, "What do you mean by that? Let me tell you, there are 2 ways to splash dirty water on others, but not 3 or 4 times. Don't think of using it on me again." After Lu Zhu was beaten, no matter how she felt when she saw Jane Eyre again, at least on the surface, she was calm. She scolded when she needed to scold, hit when she needed to hit, and did not remember the slightest bit of affection from the past. Speaking like a stranger, Jane Eyre was slightly startled. Then, he frowned and glanced at the servant girls who had gathered around to look at them. Ignoring Lu Zhu's objections, he pulled Lu Zhu's hand and walked to the side of the fake mountain in the garden of the Fu. He tried his best to lower his voice, but still could not help but reveal a trace of suppressed anger. "You found someone to harm her?" Lu Zhu's heart was very sour when she saw him act like this just for Liao Meng. When she heard his words, she did not get angry but instead laughed. "Jane Eyre, touch your conscience and ask, you and I have not known each other for a day and night. Don't you know what kind of person I am? Setting people up in the gutter has never been something that I, Lu Zhu, would do. But that fiancé of yours." She sneered, "A thief calling out a thief." Jane Eyre's grip on her hand tightened again. Lu Zhu frowned and looked at him. Suddenly, she discovered that Jane Eyre's eyes were slightly red. She endured it and finally asked stiffly, "What happened to her?" "Last night, someone broke into her courtyard and wanted to take her body by force. Although someone tried to rescue her later, they did not succeed, but her innocence was ruined," Jane Eyre said in a low voice, as if every word was squeezed out from the gaps between his teeth. When Lu Zhu heard this, she was somewhat stunned at first. Then, a nameless fire rose in her heart and she laughed. "Could it be that you think that I did this? It really wasn't you?" Jane Eyre asked in a hoarse voice. Lu Zhu abruptly raised her head to look at him. Her gaze was as fierce as a lion's. She stared into Jane Eyre's eyes and said word by word, "It wasn't me." Jane Eyre let go of her hand. He seemed to be a little tired. Lu Zhu turned around and left. After taking 2 steps, she turned around and looked back. She saw that Jane Eyre was still standing motionless at the fake mountain. She walked over and stood in front of Jane Eyre, asking, "Why do you think that I did it?" The masked man who was caught, Jane Eyre sighed, but his expression did not appear relaxed. Instead, it appeared very complicated. He continued, "The person who admitted to giving him the money came from Jinying Wangfu. The news that Liao Meng's innocence was almost sullied in the middle of the night had spread throughout the entire capital the next day. By now, Jane Eyre, Liao Meng and Lu Zhu's matter had become the hottest topic in the entire capital. This matter would cause some disturbance every few days, but it caused the common people in the capital to have endless topics to talk about every day. Although those masked men did not succeed in the end, such a thing happened and it was spread all over the city. Liao Meng's reputation could be considered finished in this lifetime. However, there were more people who sympathized with her. Most of them secretly guessed who the person behind this was. There were also some people who felt that this matter was related to the servant girl in the Wang Fu. No matter how the outside world guessed, the one who suffered was still Liao Meng. However, Liao Meng's result was better than other girls who encountered this kind of thing. That was that Jin Eyre was still a man who had feelings for her. He did not despise her or cancel the engagement because of this matter. In this way, in the eyes of the common people in the capital, these two people were a match made in heaven. After all, not everyone could be a couple who could go through hardships. In the courtyard, Zhou Mama picked up the bowl of medicine and fed it to Liao Meng. The medicine was also bitter, but Liao Meng drank it without frowning. Zhou Mama looked very haggard recently. She was the one who blamed herself the most for what happened to Liao Meng. She only blamed herself for not protecting Liao Meng well and letting outsiders take advantage of the loophole. Every day, she went to the yamen to urge them to catch the mastermind. After Zhou Mama fed Liao Meng the medicine, she went out. After Zhou Mama left, Liao Meng got out of bed. In the past few days, she was frightened and bedridden. She always looked a little panicked. But if someone saw her at this moment, they would be shocked. Liao Meng looked calm and even had a little smile on her face. She went to the dressing table and sat down. She took out a small box from the side. There was a small folded letter in the box. She slowly opened the letter and read it quickly. Then she tore it into pieces and threw it into the wastepaper basket she used to practice calligraphy. Then she slowly sat back on the bed and looked out of the window in a trance. Things had gone much smoother than she had imagined. There was no lack of people in this world who would protect their own. To set up a trap according to a person's temperament, it was nothing more than to grab hold of the weakest part of a person's heart. As long as one was human, there would always be a weakness. And the colder one's appearance was, the more intolerant one's heart was, and the higher one's emotional requirements were. As a result, the door to Jining Wang's Fu was opened. Of course, in this way, to her, it was just a case of everyone looking out for themselves. It was all for her own benefit. Liao Meng's guess was right. Jin Eyre's matter did not only affect Lu Zhu. For example, at this moment, she looked at Xiao Xiao and said angrily, "You suspect me?" Xiao Xiao was silent for a moment and did not speak. That day, Jin Eyre had impulsively come over to denounce her, causing Jiang Ruan to finally be unable to restrain the anger in her heart. Originally, it was fine if she had made Lu Zhu sad, but now, this dirty water had been splashed onto her. Jiang Ruan had originally been very disdainful of that Miss Liao, so when she heard this, she was really angry. At that time, she wanted to expel Jin Eyre from the brocade guard. However, Xiao Xiao stopped her. Jin Eyre had followed Xiao Xiao for many years. To Xiao Xiao, his position was similar to that of Bai Ji and Lu Zhu to Jiang Ruan. There was an unwritten rule in the brocade guard that the subordinates' family affairs were unrelated to the official affairs of the brocade guard. In the past, Xiao Xiao would never expel any member of the brocade guard for their own personal matters. Although the actions of the second member of the brocade guard were thoughtless, it had nothing to do with official business. The rules of the brocade guard were strict and could not be changed. Xiao Xiao wanted to convince the masses, so he could not hastily dispose of Jin Eyre. That day, only one of the masked men who had made a move on Liao Meng had been caught. That person claimed that someone had given them money to do this business. The identity of the person behind this was unknown, but it seemed to faintly reveal that it was someone from Jining Wang Fu. Originally, Jin Eyre had thought that it was Lu Zhu. However, Lu Zhu was a maidservant, so it was impossible for her to take out so much money. Moreover, Lu Zhu's temperament was not one to haggle over every penny. Naturally, the spearhead of suspicion fell on Jiang Ruan. Jiang Ruan's methods were ruthless, and she never showed mercy. Especially towards those who made her unhappy, she would certainly repay them 100-fold. That Liao Meng had bullied Lu Zhu. With Jiang Ruan's protective temperament, how could she not get back at her? Looking for someone to cause trouble for Liao Meng, with Jiang Ruan's temperament and wealth, seemed to be her doing. Jiang Ruan wanted to expel Jin Air, but Xiao Xiao did not comply. He even said that Jiang Ruan should not interfere in this matter. Jiang Ruan was flustered, so she spoke without thinking, "Are you suspecting me?" "I did not mean that." Xiao Xiao said, "It's just that this matter is his family's business, so there is no reason to interfere." "Your subordinate is a person, but is my maidservant not a person?" Jiang Ruan said incredulously, "Xiao Xiao, I have also told you, this matter was not done by me, and it has nothing to do with me. I do not admit to this crime. You want to protect your shortcomings, and I also want to protect mine. Since we each have our own ideas, then there is no need to say anything." She heavily placed the book on the table, turned around, and walked out. This was the first time the husband and wife had quarreled since they had gotten married, and moreover, it was over a matter that had nothing to do with them. However, Xiao Xiao's temperament was originally cold, and Jiang Ruan's self-esteem was extremely strong. For a moment, the Cold War between them was even more frightening than the one between Lu Zhu and Jin Air. Everyone in the Fu felt insecure, and it was as if dark clouds were hanging over their heads. Xiao Xiao was usually very obedient towards Jiang Ruan, and he treated the brocade guards strictly. Unfortunately, he was also a person who was protective of his own people, and Jiang Ruan was also a person who was protective of her own people. Compared to Xiao Xiao, Jiang Ruan's temperament was slightly more prejudiced. Perhaps it was because of her previous life's experiences that she could not tolerate the people around her to suffer even the slightest bit of grievance. Once Xiao Xiao showed even the slightest bit of an attitude of shielding Jin Air, she could not help but be sensitive and overthink things, and her attitude became much more extreme. Xiao Xiao also became busier and busier, and the misunderstanding could not be explained. The invisible barrier between the two of them also became increasingly thick. On the contrary, Lu Zhu was extremely worried for Jiang Ruan. Looking at Jiang Ruan's back as she sat in the study, she said to Lian Qiao in a low voice, "Young Furen seems to be fine these past few days, but I am always worried that she has kept everything to herself. Wang Yi has not returned to the Fu much these past few days, how can this be good?" Lian Qiao shook her head and said, "Young Furen has a stubborn temperament, and Wang Yi is not someone who knows how to say sweet words and honeyed phrases, so naturally, this is not good. Let's not talk about them. Have you been any better? I don't think that Jin Air is a good match, and you are probably feeling sad in your heart." Now that Jiang Ruan had become the target of suspicion, to Jin Air, if the son did not kill the son would die because of the child. Lu Zhu was also the cause of Liao Meng's mishap, so Jin Air and Lu Zhu could now be said to be true strangers. Moreover, Jiang Ruan and Xiao Xiao were like this, so naturally, Lu Zhu also felt bad in her heart. Lu Zhu lowered her head, "This was originally caused by me, and originally, it was only my problem. It was my fault for making son-in-law and young Furen unhappy. However, Lian Qiao, in my heart, I feel that all of this was Liao Meng's doing. Perhaps you think that I am malicious, but for Liao Meng to encounter this matter, it may not necessarily be karma. I feel that since she is the cause of son-in-law and young Furen's anger, she is the evil person." Lian Qiao nodded Lu Zhu's head, "You, this girl, are not worried about your own matters anymore. Don't worry, young Furen is so intelligent, and she is used to manipulating people's hearts. She will certainly not be tricked by others. Let's just focus on our own matters." Lu Zhu sighed, "It is precisely because young Furen is good at manipulating people's hearts that she used to speculate on son-in-law with the eyes and thoughts of those people, which is why things are so bad. Young Furen can guess everyone's hearts, but she can't figure out her own heart. As the two of them were talking, they heard a little maid come in from outside to report, Young Furen, Master Qi is here. At this moment, Xiao Xiao was also not in the fu. Jiang Wan walked out of the room, and just as she reached the courtyard, she saw Qi Feng walking in from outside. She did not know what he had been busy with these days, but even though they were very close, she had not seen him visit. Jiang Wan smiled, "Why are you here? What a rare guest. A few days ago, a friend came to the capital, and I went to receive him for a while, so I did not have the time to come over." Third sister-in-law, don't be angry, Qi Feng smiled, I also know that I am in the wrong, so I specially came over to apologize. As he spoke, he raised the thing in his hand, which was a square box, and it was unknown what was inside. Jiang Wan smiled, who would come to visit with a gift? This is not a tavern that accepts money. Chapter 226. Qi Feng also smiled and said, "It's just some novelty." Third sister-in-law, what good things have you not seen in the Wangfu? I'm just showing my incompetence. He paused and said, "To tell you the truth, I heard that something happened in the Wangfu." Since Qi Feng had already said so, he must have heard the ins and outs of the matter. He and Xiao Xiao were martial brothers, and he was also helping Xiao Xiao in the matters of the 100 Zhang Tower. Naturally, he had a lot of friendship with the Genie Guard. Since he was a member of the Genie Guard, he must stand on the side of the Genie Guard. For this matter, Qi Feng might also be on the side of Jiner. Jiang Wan smiled faintly and said, "Oh, is it possible that you are also here to denounce me?" After all, the matter of the dew had a great impact on her. Usually, she would speak in a gentle manner. Perhaps it was because she was not in a good mood these days, or because Qi Feng was also an acquaintance, there was no need to put on a mask in front of an acquaintance. Therefore, there was some sarcasm in her words. Qi Feng pointed to the stone table in the courtyard and said, "Why don't we sit down and have a chat?" Jiang Wan nodded and the two sat down in front of the stone table in the courtyard. Lian Xiao served tea and snacks and retreated to the side. Jiang Wan looked at the tea. She still had a smile on her face, but her tone was a little cold. Could it be that Qi Feng also thinks that this matter is all my servant's fault, and that I also sent people to destroy Miss Liao's purity? According to third sister-in-law's character, it is very likely that she would do such a thing. Qi Feng smiled and stroked his chin. Now, he had shaved off all his beard, but he still retained his original habit. This action was a little abrupt, but he obviously did not feel it. He still looked at Jiang Ruan's unchanging expression with a smile and said, "But if third sister-in-law made a move, how could she let Miss Liao escape? Third sister-in-law's methods have never failed. So, the person behind this can't be third sister-in-law." Jiang Wan also laughed, "What you mean is that I'm a bad person, but I'm a very bad person. Do you mean that I don't have the qualifications to be a bad person with a compassionate heart?" "No, no," Qi Feng quickly waved his hand and said, "I'm saying that third sister-in-law is brave and fierce, and her work is flawless. Such a lousy and flawed plan is definitely not made by third sister-in-law." When Jiang Wan heard this, she looked at him with a smile that was not a smile and said, "Are you trying to curry favor with me by saying this? Aren't you afraid that this matter will reach the ears of the brocade guard? There is no such thing as a two-faced person." Qi Feng sighed, "Am I, Qi Feng, a two-faced fence-sitter in third sister-in-law's eyes?" Qi Feng smiled proudly. "Since third sister-in-law and the genie guards are on opposite sides, I will unconditionally stand on your side. We have done a big thing together, we have some friendship in times of adversity. Third sister-in-law, rest assured, I am an absolutely loyal person." Looking at Jiang Wan smiling without saying anything, but her expression was obviously much softer than before, Qi Feng sighed in his heart and continued, "But third sister-in-law, have you ever thought about the person behind this matter? The person behind this? Jiang Wan said faintly, I want to investigate, but now that your third brother is not in the Fu every day, I have nothing to say to him about this matter. After all, the brocade guard is his people, I can't order them around. Moreover, if his people can't find the person, how can I find him? After all, it was not me who did it. Maybe it was just that woman's own play. Play. Qi Feng was a little speechless, Although this is also very likely, reputation for a woman is more important than her life. If that Miss Liao really played such a play, wouldn't it be too much of a sacrifice for her? This is a losing business. A losing business? Jiang Wan smiled lightly, so, men and women always see things differently. Reputation is indeed important for a woman, but if she can get what she wants, then reputation is not important, and the sacrifice is worth it. Although this may seem like a self-destructive move in your eyes, as the days go by, you will slowly realize that this is not harmful to her at all. Even if she is criticized by others, it will only be a bit of irrelevant gossip. If you say so, then that woman has gained? But I still don't understand. Qi Feng was a little confused. Jiang Wan glanced at him. Even if Qi Feng was extremely intelligent and showed off his skills in the court, the rear courtyard and the front court were after all different battlefields. Men could never distinguish a woman's scheming mind. If Qi Feng thought so, then Xiao Xiao and Jean Eyre's thoughts could be imagined. Perhaps this was the difference between men and women. She smiled slightly. Well, let me ask you, what is the background of that Miss Liao now? Her parents are dead, and she is alone. She carries the family's wealth, and her relatives are eyeing her covetously. Qi Feng thought about it and added a few more sentences. Now, the only thing she can rely on is her marriage with Jean Eyre. That's right, if you are her, what other path do you have now? Jiang Wan asked. Jean Eyre was speechless and mumbled, third sister-in-law, I am not a woman. Your analogy is too strange. Jiang Wan did not respond to his words and continued, for such a weak woman who carries the family's wealth, if she wants to keep it and not be shaken by her relatives, the only way is to find a good backer. Jean Eyre's family background and mansion are not bad. For Liao Meng, there is no better choice than Jean Eyre. To put it bluntly, if she passes this village, she will not be able to find this shop. Naturally, Liao Meng will hold on tightly to this opportunity. For those who want to cross the mountain, no matter how many choices there are, their ultimate goal is to cross the mountain. Similarly, if Liao Meng wants to marry into Jean Eyre's Fu, no matter what she does, no matter what sacrifices she has to make, as long as she can get what she wants in the end, this transaction is not considered a loss. Qi Feng listened without blinking. Jiang Ruan's voice was soft and sweet-sounding, but it was very clear and calm. Okay, let's take a look at the possible consequences of this matter. Now that the matter of Liao Meng being molested has been spread to everyone in the capital, everyone knows that she is a victim and a person to be pitied. Jean Eyre has not cancelled his marriage with her, so he has a good reputation in the capital. Even if there are people who say that Liao Meng is not worthy of Jean Eyre, it is only a very small number. In the future, when Jean Eyre and Liao Meng are married, they will say that they are a match made in heaven. On the contrary, Dezhu and I are now villains. Since Jean Eyre suspects that I am the one who did this, he will have more contact with Liao Meng. Qi Feng, tell me, it is just sacrificing one's reputation. At worst, a small number of people will say bad things about her, but she can get the blessings of everyone, the pity of her husband, and completely kill the woman who was previously involved with her husband. Is this transaction still considered a loss for Miss Liao? Qi Feng had long been stunned by what he heard. After a moment, he smiled bitterly and shook his head. I originally thought that I was smart, but younger sister is like a fool in front of third sister-in-law. Now it seems that it is not third sister-in-law, but that Miss Liao can almost play me in the palm of her hand. To actually use her own reputation as a bargaining chip, that Miss Liao is really not an ordinary person. As Chi Feng thought about this, he suddenly looked at Jiang Wan and said, "But third sister-in-law, since you have already seen through her intentions, according to what you said, it may indeed be a trap set by Liao Meng. Why not tell third brother about this?" Jiang Wan lowered her eyes. "Why tell him? Xiao Xiao is a confident person, he has his own judgment. Since he has his own judgment, how can he believe what others say? It will only add to his troubles." "Third sister-in-law, what you said is wrong," Chi Feng interrupted her words. "You know that third brother is not such a person." "Third sister-in-law, I think you are unwilling." Although Chi Feng was not as good at guessing people's minds as Jiang Wan, after being with Jiang Wan for so long, he had roughly figured out Jiang Ruan's character. Jiang Wan was a somewhat awkward person. It was normal for a husband and wife to meet for the first time. She was not willing to bow her head, and even refused to explain. This might be another kind of arrogance. If it was someone who was thick-skinned and said good words, they would be reconciled after a little coaxing. However, the other party was a taciturn person like Xiao Xiao. Thinking about this, Chi Feng was also a little depressed. Jiang Wan saw through his thoughts and pretended to be angry. "You are not saying good words for Liao Meng, but for Xiao Xiao. If you are saying good words for him, forget it as soon as possible. I have no time to accompany you to drink tea." Hey, Chi Feng quickly touched his nose and said, No, how can I be such a person? What I mean is, third brother is too unreasonable. Third sister-in-law, don't be angry. Look at the little thing I brought for you. Chi Feng went to open the box on the side. There was a wooden carved round box in the box. Jiang Wan took it and only saw that the round box was carved with a small person. The lid on the box could be opened, so she subconsciously opened it. Immediately, a smooth sound of music came out. She was shocked and looked at Chi Feng inquiringly. Chi Feng smiled and said, "My friend just came back from the sea. This thing is from a Western country. It is called the 8 music box. There is the sound of music in it. Interesting, right?" Jiang Wan could not help but laugh. In fact, in her previous life and this life, she was in a different place. Although she did not have the opportunity to own some exquisite things, she had seen many rare treasures. It was just that the thing that Chi Feng found in a different way was different. This thing was not expensive, but it was novel and interesting, which was rare. Chi Feng had been here for so long, and finally saw that Jiang Ruan's smile was not polite and gentle, but from the heart. He was relieved and said, "Third sister-in-law, do you like it? If you like it, why don't you go there yourself?" He seemed to think of something and said, "He also has a lot of things in the Yibao Pavilion. I don't know if third sister-in-law has been there. If you haven't, why don't you go and have a look now? Anyway, the Yibao Pavilion belongs to our family. Maybe there is something that will catch your eye." Jiang Wan was startled. She had not been to the Yibao Pavilion for a long time. She knew that it was Xiao Xiao's business. She thought of the time when she went to the Yibao Pavilion. At that time, she and Xiao Xiao were not husband and wife. When she went to the Yibao Pavilion with Dong Yinger and Xiao Jin, she was shocked by the price. At that time, she planned to get a precious shield for Jiang Xing. She thought for a while and said to Chi Feng with a smile, "Okay." This time it was Chi Feng's turn to be dumbfounded. He was just joking. After all, Jiang Wan was now a princess. How could she always walk with an outsider like him? Although her relationship with Xiao Xiao was not close to the point of avoiding suspicion, he always felt that with Jiang Ruan's exquisite mind, she might have discovered his thoughts. Jiang Wan was a person who could not bear to have sand in her eyes, but she could say the 2 words, "Okay," so calmly. Chi Feng also stared at her blankly for a while and did not speak. "What's wrong?" Jiang Wan seemed to notice his gaze and said with a smile, "What's wrong? You have something to do, so you are unwilling to go out with me?" I will trouble you this time. At worst, I will add in the travel expenses in the future. Qi Feng came back to his senses. He was also a man of character. Jiang Wan, a woman, was so calm. If he refused again, it would seem a little strange. Moreover, the great Jin dynasty was not so harsh on married women. As long as there was no intimate action, there was no harm in it. Thinking that Jiang Wan had been in a bad mood in the Fu recently, it was better to go out and relax. He smiled and said, "How would I dare? I will go prepare the carriage." Lian Xiao was still a little hesitant. If Jiang Wan went out with Qi Feng like this, it would seem that Qi Feng was deliberately trying to poach her. Every time Qi Feng looked at Jiang Ruan, there was a strange look in his eyes. As Jiang Ruan's personal maid, Lian Xiao noticed it and muttered in her heart. Dezhu did not have so many concerns and only said, "Young madam has been trapped in the Fu for a long time. It is good to go out for a walk. Since Master Qi is the son-in-law's friend, he will know what to do." Tianzhu said, "I will protect them. Lian Xiao, you will go with me. Dezhu will stay in the Fu. If you meet Liao Meng on the street, I am afraid there will be trouble." Tianzhu's words had always been short. As a former member of the embroidered uniform guard, Tianzhu surprised everyone by standing firmly on Dewdrop's side. In her opinion, Liao Meng had ulterior motives. This matter was most likely aimed at Dezhu. It was better for Dezhu not to go out these days. Who knew what kind of tricks that woman had up her sleeves? If Dezhu went out, she would not be tricked. Dezhu also knew that Tianzhu was worried about her. Her heart warmed and she agreed with a smile. After they finished packing, they went out of the Fu's main gate. In the room, a young man was sitting in front of a chessboard, playing chess with himself. From a distance, the man's side profile looked very beautiful, especially his sharp chin, which seemed to be full of beauty. His lips were bright red, as if they had just been smeared with rouge. However, when one looked closer, the beauty was destroyed by a pair of green fox eyes. Half of his face was covered with a mask, and he seemed to be staring at the chess game in front of him leisurely. It was unknown when a person appeared in the room and whispered, "Darren, Jiang Wan and Qi Feng have left the Fu." The room was silent for a long time. The man holding the chessboard held a chess piece in one hand and frowned as he carefully studied the chess game, as if considering where to start. After a while, he smiled slightly, put the chess piece in the center, and said, "Go out." The people in the room quickly retreated. The man looked at the chess game in front of him, and the smile on his lips became more and more charming. It seemed to contain some kind of profound meaning. He stared at the chessboard for a while, then suddenly reached out and flicked his sleeves. The chess pieces on the chessboard were instantly disrupted, and one by one, they fell to the ground, making a crisp sound. The man seemed to enjoy it very much. He closed his eyes and listened quietly. After a long time, he raised his eyes again and looked at the windowsill. There was a pot of orchid on the windowsill. The white petals of the orchid were slightly stretched out, and as if they were alive, they trembled gently. In this gloomy room, it was like a ray of light, exuding a strange fragrance. The man smiled slightly and whispered, "Attacking the heart is the best, a woman." This time, his words were full of contempt. While the capital was filled with rumors and slanders, the palace was strangely calm. The emperor went to court as usual. He reviewed the memorials that needed to be reviewed. He scolded the insensible officials that needed to be scolded and beheaded those that needed to be beheaded. He promoted the officials that he liked and rewarded them when they needed to be rewarded. However, some of the more attentive officials realized that the emperor hadn't asked about the affairs of the court for a long time. Now, there were only 2 princes left. In fact, the emperor had even changed his warm attitude towards the 13th prince, Xian Pei. Now, he didn't even care about the other 2 princes. Whether it was in court or in private, the 2 princes seemed to have been forgotten. Therefore, the officials were all confused. Those who had daughters in the palace would think of ways to get them to bring back a message. What was the emperor's intention now? Unexpectedly, the news brought back by the women was even more dismal. Not only the two princes, but the emperor also rarely went to the palace. There were very few concubines that could get close to him. Now, other than the ice beauty Mushiro, the only one who could get close to the emperor was the little beauty Dong Yinger, but that was only because she was good at cooking. The women in the palace complained that they had let down the palace because of the lack of beauties, but the officials of the previous dynasty smelled something unusual. These officials had seen much of the world. The emperor's seemingly small action might have some hidden meaning, such as his cold treatment of the two princes. Although it was strange, the officials would not give up their support for the two princes just because of the emperor's cold treatment. Now, it was a gamble. They were afraid that they would choose the wrong side. If they bet correctly, then they would win, and riches would be within reach. Therefore, the requests for the appointment of the crown prince still flew to the emperor's desk like snowflakes. In the room, Mingyu looked at Xian Pei, who was sitting in front of the table practicing calligraphy. Now that everyone had chosen their side, and Xianli was using all kinds of methods, be it forceful or tempting, all in order to win people over to his side, Xian Pei seemed to be abnormally relaxed. Even if the emperor didn't summon him, he was happy to be at ease. All day in the room, he practiced calligraphy and rested, as if he really was a prince. If it weren't for the fact that Mingyu and Chao Yang were Xian Pei's trusted aides and knew of his hidden ambitions, they would have thought that this handsome boy with a face full of smiles really didn't have many plans and was just a slightly intelligent and noble young master. Chapter 227. Mingyu said, "Your Highness, today Cabinet Elder Wang and Prime Minister Chiu both sent people to 8th Prince's residence. They stayed for 2 hours before coming out. This is the second time." Xian Pei made a sound of acknowledgement and continued to write his characters in ink without a care. Chaoyang and Mingyue looked at each other. Although palace maids should not discuss matters of their masters, Mingyue and Chaoyang were sent by Xiao Xiao to help Xian Pei, and Mingyue were old people in the palace. Sometimes, the fight for the throne wasn't just a fight between two princes. It was a fight between two forces. If one of them lost, there would still be people supporting him. Thus, the fight for the throne would often end in rivers of blood. The sacrifices and cruelty were all for the sake of that position. Since he was one of Xian Pei's people, he would have to fight with Xianli sooner or later. The day when the two of them would fight each other would come sooner or later. What he had to do now was to increase his chances of winning before that day came. Xian Pei's nonchalant attitude would make anyone who didn't know the situation feel that he was unreliable and not worth following. Compared to Xian Li's large number of followers and aides, Xian Pei's methods of recruiting talents. It should be said that he did not take the initiative to recruit talents. It was always people who wanted to come to him. As a matter of fact, Cabinet Elder Wang and Prime Minister Chiu had always secretly supported Xian Pei. Now that the emperor treated the two princes coldly, Xian Li's troops were growing stronger and stronger, but Xian Pei didn't make any movements. He also didn't offer any benefits to the ministers who came to seek refuge. Over time, those people gradually disappeared. Cabinet Elder Wang and Prime Minister Chiu were originally a large force. From the looks of it, they had already sided with Xianli. More and more people left on his side, but Xianli was not anxious at all. "Your Highness," Chao Yang was somewhat anxious. "Cabinet Elder Wang and Prime Minister Chiu are obviously your people, but they still left like this. This is really burning the bridge after crossing the river." Xian Pei smiled but was not moved. Mingyu was also very puzzled, but she knew that this young man was not a stupid person. His scheming and forbearance were beyond the imagination of ordinary people. There must be a reason why he did this. She said, "Your Highness does not seem worried at all." Xian Pei finally finished the last stroke and heaved a sigh of relief. He put down the brush and looked at Mingyu. what doubts do you have? Xian Li's attitude towards her was stricter than towards Chao Yang because she was Xiao Xiao's person. However, he valued her more than Chao Yang because there were many things that he needed her to do. She was agile and could do better. Hearing this, Mingyu knelt down and said, "This servant does not understand why your highness does not take the initiative to recruit talents, and does not know how to tempt those who come to seek refuge. What I do not understand is that at this critical juncture, the 8th prince is constantly making moves, but your highness only stays in the house and does not make a move. You have too many questions." Xian Pei looked at her and said slowly. He played with the thumb ring on his hand and suddenly smiled. "However, your highness is in a good mood today, so I can answer you. It's just that Xiao Xiao's people don't even know this little thing. It really broadens my horizons." Xian Pei was always changing his ways to insult Xiao Xiao whenever he had the chance. Mingyu had heard it many times, and treated it as a child's fight, so she did not really take it to heart. Xian Pei saw that Mingyu's expression did not change, and did not get angry. It seemed that he also felt that it was somewhat boring. He coughed and said, "Talents are not actively recruited. If I want to contend against Xianli, who do you think I need to support the most? Talents?" Mingyu did not speak. At any time, no matter if it was a fight for the throne or not, a wise ruler would always think of ways to select talents. Talents were naturally fought over by the rulers. Xian Pei smiled faintly. "Wrong. Talents. The reason why talents are talents is because they need to be appreciated by a wise ruler. This is not a peaceful and prosperous era, nor is it a peaceful world. This is a battle of life and death. If you are not careful, you will lose everything. I think, talents are important, but it is not as important as ambition." "Ambition?" Mingyu asked. "Ambition." Xian Pei sat on the chair. His body was thin and weak, and had not fully developed. Sitting on the wide chair was somewhat awkward. But his long sleeves flowed down from the chair and covered the floor. His indolence caused Mingyu to be in a trance. She felt that the person sitting in front of her was not a young lad, but a mature and wise man. "A thin, hungry wolf and a well-trained hound," Xian Pei said faintly. "In the days when there's no need to fight for anything, a smart hound is certainly good, but when it comes to robbing, killing, and robbing, it's probably much better to bring along a thin, hungry wolf. Your so-called talents are hunting dogs, and ambitious people are hungry wolves. What I am facing is a battle of life and death. It is a battle of flesh and blood. Whoever is more ferocious, the more advantageous it is to me. You can use meat to recruit hunting dogs. But for a hungry wolf, you will never use meat to recruit it. Because what it wants, is to kill the other party." Mingyu was silent for a while, then asked. "Although a hungry wolf is ferocious, but in the future, it will inevitably develop a bestial nature, and devour its master. There will not be such a chance." Xian Pei said. Mingyu was startled. She heard Xian Pei's voice coming from above her. After the prey is dead, there is no need for the hungry wolf to exist. Naturally, it will find an opportunity to kill. Hearing this, Mingyu's body trembled. She did not expect this young lad to be so decisive. He could easily say that the cunning rabbit should be cooked. Although these words were despicable and cruel, it was the best start on the road to becoming an emperor. Xian Pei's courage had already surprised her, but he was still so decisive. Xian Pei looked at the dazed Mingyu. Ambition is only used to deal with enemies. If they have ambitions for what is mine, and secretly covet it, I will destroy their ambitions forever. Chao Yang, who was standing far away, heard Xian Pei's words. She could not help but feel her heart tighten. She suppressed the pressure in her heart. She had always known that the 13th prince was not simple, but she did not know that his wisdom and methods had already reached the level of a future emperor. His age was no longer a flaw, it could even be an excellent cover. Then why did your highness not name a price? Mingyu asked. If there was a price, wouldn't it be easier to recruit ambitious people? How do you think my forces are compared to Xian Li's? Xian Pei asked. Mingyu was startled, but she quickly regained her senses. She knew that Xian Pei was a person who could see things clearly, and there was no point in lying. She honestly said, the 8th prince's forces are stronger. That's right. His forces are stronger. If I name a price, once he knows the price, he just needs to raise it a little. With his forces, he can also do this. Those who are tempted by my price, when they see a higher price, will definitely follow. On the contrary, wouldn't it be better to wait for the highest price and obtain a priceless treasure? Xian Pei smiled. Let them never know their own value, forever have hope for the future, and work even harder. These people who are bought over priceless treasures are things that Xian Li will never be able to buy with a tangible price. Mingyu seemed to understand, but she did not. Xian Pei continued, do you think that the number of people following Xian Li is increasing? Do you know that this is not a good thing for him? Mingyu nodded, then shook her head. The same amount of money, when divided between 2 people, will be much more beneficial. There are many people behind Xian Li, but the more people there are, when Xian Li gets what he wants, the smaller the contribution each person will get. On the contrary, there are not many people behind me, and if I succeed in the future, those people will get a larger share of the benefits. In other words, the people standing behind me are all driven by the greater benefits. These people driven by the greater benefits will never be moved by Xian Li's small benefits. Because there is no price, but because of the effort they put in, they will give birth to the idea of gambling. Have you ever seen a person who gives up halfway in gambling? Generally not. The people behind me, everyone has the idea of gambling, so they are the most stable part. Mingyu listened as if she was enlightened, but she was faintly surprised and did not understand. She looked at Xian Pei and said, but Cabinet Elder Wang and Prime Minister Qiu, these are people who are driven by small benefits. Even if they do not leave today, one day they will bring harm to me because of the benefits in front of them. It is better to kick them out early. Such a short-sighted blade, I believe, even if Xian Li holds it in his hands, he will not feel happy. Xian Pei suddenly thought of something, and suddenly smiled. Besides, do you think it is a good thing that there are more and more people behind Xian Li? I think Father in the palace is really full of anger now. The anger of the Son of Heaven is not something that anyone can bear. Your Majesty. Mingyu was shocked. Right now, the Emperor did not seem to care much about the 2 princes and did not have much to say about the matter of changing the crown prince. Could it be that he was still secretly paying attention to this matter? Mingyu thought for a moment and said, since His Majesty is paying attention to this matter, I heard from Eunuch Li that there is no end to the impeachment of His Highness regarding the matter in Qing'an County a few days ago. His Majesty is very angry and most likely holds some displeasure towards His Highness. Should we think of a way to refute or find an opportunity to impeach 8th Prince? Before Xian Hua was born, there was a period of time when the Emperor thought highly of Xian Pei. Whenever there was any major matter in court, he would test Xian Pei's opinion. The snowstorm in Qing'an County had been severe. At that time, the Emperor had asked Xian Pei, and Xian Pei had written a memorial on how to deal with the snowstorm. The memorial was written in a standard manner, and there were some novel parts, but it was not overflowing with talent. In the end, it was accepted by the Emperor. As a matter of fact, news had come from Qing'an County a few days ago that Xian Pei's methods had not been of much use. As a result, the 8th Prince's subordinates immediately seized this opportunity to impeach Xian Pei on the grounds that he was young and playful, using the important matters of the people's lives as a joke. Naturally, there were old officials who had followed the Emperor for many years. Every memorial they wrote was full of heartache and hatred. Those who did not know would think that Xian Pei had committed some heinous crime. However, being impeached by so many people would inevitably leave a bad impression on the Emperor. When Mingyu thought of this, she still felt uneasy. Go and arrange a few people. Tell the people on my side to send me the memorials as well. Xian Pei shook his sleeves carelessly. Impeach 8th Prince as well? Chao Yang could not help but ask. Her expression was one of joy. In her opinion, the 8th Prince's subordinates had not been right to hit him when he was down. Unexpectedly, Xian Pei shook his head and said, Impeach me. What? Chao Yang cried out in shock. She immediately realized that she had overstepped her boundaries. She hurriedly knelt down and begged for forgiveness. Mingyu also frowned, not understanding why Xian Pei had done this. Xian Pei smiled and slowly moved his lips. Mingyu froze and felt a chill run down her spine. She raised her eyes to look at the young man sitting on the throne. Half of the young man's body was submerged in the soft cushion as he carelessly supported his chin with his hand. The sunlight outside the window dimmed and half of the young man's body fell into the shadows. He was like a silent stone statue, sturdy and heavy. He was like a lonely and cruel emperor sitting on a high throne separated by layers of curtains, green tiles and glazed glass. A true emperor. He smiled and said, Everyone submit to Xianli. Let him see who the world belongs to. The sun set in the west in the blink of an eye. In the early spring, the sky darkened early. Jiang Wan and Qi Feng went out of the small shop on the street and returned to the Wang Fu. Perhaps it was because Jiang Wan had not been out for a long time, or perhaps it was because Qi Feng was a humorous person, the two of them got along very well. Not only did they visit the Yi Bao Gu, they also visited the other shops. Previously, during the wedding, she had also gone to take a look at the shops that Xian Pei had given her. Jiang Wan did not have any other thoughts. Although Xian Pei had given these shops to her, she currently did not lack money. She only wanted to manage them well and return them to Xian Pei in the future. If one day Xian Pei really sat in that position, even if he did not sit in that position, his environment was destined to make him need these things more than Jiang Ruan. In Jiang Ruan's eyes, Xian Pei would always be her child. They visited the shop together with Qi Feng and bought some things. They even ate something in the shop outside before returning. When they returned to the gate of the Fu, it was already very late. Qi Feng held a pile of trivial things in his hands, which were all bought by Jiang Ruan today. In order to avoid suspicion, the two of them did not take the carriage. Jiang Ruan did not know why today she was in high spirits and bought a lot of things. It had to be said that now that she was not short of money, it was really refreshing to buy things. In this way, all the heavy work fell to Qi Feng. Qi Feng hugged all the things. When they reached the gate of the Fu, Jiang Ruan smiled and said, Give them to me. You have worked hard today. Qi Feng smiled bitterly, It's not hard at all. Even if I have to work like a cow or a horse, I would not dare to refuse. If I don't do it, I will be scolded by third brother. Jiang Ruan was startled, and Qi Feng also realized that he had said the wrong thing. For a moment, he was at a loss of what to do. Jiang Ruan reached out to take the things in Qi Feng's hand, but she did not expect that her foot would slip. Qi Feng rushed to help her, and the things fell to the ground. Qi Feng grabbed Jiang Ruan's hand and looked at the woman in front of him, but he was a little absent-minded. Wasn't leaving these past few days also a form of escape? It was just that he was afraid that he would sink deeper and deeper. Jiang Ruan was able to be unperturbed as she pleased, but no matter what, he was unable to do the same. Such close contact caused him to be somewhat dazed for a moment. Such a scene was unintentional, but in the eyes of others, it seemed somewhat ambiguous. They only heard a familiar voice, Young Master is back. Accompanied by the sound of the door opening, housekeeper Lin's head also poked out. After seeing Jiang Ruan and Qi Feng, he could not help but be surprised. Perhaps what surprised him even more was the posture of Jiang Ruan and Qi Feng. Jiang Wan raised her eyes and saw that Xiao Xiao was standing a few feet away, quietly looking in her direction. The sky was dark and the lantern at the Fu's entrance was swaying gently, causing his expression to be somewhat indistinct. Qi Feng took a step back and said with a smile, "Third sister-in-law, don't be careless next time." "It's done. Since third brother is back, I will also leave." After saying this, he waved his hand and turned to leave. Jiang Wan glanced at Xiao Xiao. Housekeeper Lin's face was stiff. Jiang Wan pushed the door and walked in. When she passed by Housekeeper Lin, she said, "Pick up the things and send them to the house." "Sorry for troubling Housekeeper Lin." After Jiang Wan left, Housekeeper Lin ordered the servants to pick up the things that had fallen on the ground. He was about to step forward to greet Xiao Xiao and say a few words to ease the situation, but Xiao Xiao swept past him without saying a word. The cold air on his body was really a bit shocking. Naturally, this was not the cold air brought by the frost and snow outside. Housekeeper Lin shivered and wanted to cry but had no tears. How could the young madam, who was usually alienated from others, be so close to Qi Feng? This Qi Feng did not act properly. Could it be that he did not know the principle of not flirting with a friend's wife? No, Qi Feng was Master Xixiang. Naturally, he would not do such a cruel and unscrupulous thing. It must have been a misunderstanding. But why the fuck did it have to be such a coincidence? This was the first time the husband and wife met at night since the Cold War. Usually, Xiao Xiao went out during the day, and when he came back at night, Jiang Wan would already be asleep. Naturally, there was no chance to talk. Who knew that Xiao Xiao would come back so early today? After Jiang Wan washed up, she did not see Xiao Xiao in the room. When she asked Tianzhu said that Xiao Xiao was in the study. She did not know what Xiao Xiao had been busy with these past few days. Perhaps he really had something to do in the study. But today, something like this happened again. It seemed a little strange for Xiao Xiao to go to the study at this time. Xiao Xiao was probably sulking. In the past, Jiang Wan thought that Xiao Xiao was a little cute, but after experiencing the matter with Jin Er and Lu Zhu, she subconsciously thought that Xiao Xiao did not trust her. No woman could accept her husband doubting her, especially when it came to his innocence. Jiang Wan also had a stubborn temper. She only made a sound of agreement and went to sleep first. She had no intention of going to the study to talk. However, Housekeeper Lin, who was full of hope, waited outside the room for her to reconcile with Jiang Wan, waited in vain for the whole night. It was night. Above the Yao family's mansion in the capital, heavy curtains were stacked on top of each other, and the bamboo and wood gave off a faint glow. In the courtyard of the Yao family's young miss, the sweet sound of a zither floated out. Every part of this courtyard was decorated beautifully and exquisitely. Everywhere was a display of elegance. Even the carp sculpture by the side of the pond was vivid and lifelike. This courtyard had originally been created by the Yao family's young miss, Yao Niannian. Master Yao obviously had high expectations for craftsmen, which was why such an exquisite courtyard had been created. This also indirectly showed that this Yao Niannian was certainly the apple of Governor Yao's eye, which was why he had so ostentatiously fulfilled her long-cherished wish. At this moment, the sound of the zither in the courtyard matched the scenery in the courtyard. Yao Niannian was extraordinarily intelligent, and she had always been proficient in the 4 arts. It was just that she was not very proficient in them. If Jiang Su had been the talented woman of the capital, then Yao Niannian would have been the most intelligent woman in everyone's hearts. The most intelligent woman might not have been the best in the 4 arts, but inexplicably, she was more respected than the talented woman. 2 servant girls standing far away were quietly discussing, "This song is really beautiful. How come I've never heard young miss play it before?" "Stupid," the other servant girl said in a low voice, "it must have been created by herself. Our young miss has always been intelligent." If this sound of the zither were to spread outside, I think that the title of the #1 zither maiden in the capital would have to be given to someone else. What nonsense are you talking about? What kind of status does that zither maiden have? How could she be mentioned in the same breath as our young miss? The smaller servant girl said, in recent years, young miss seems to like playing the zither in the courtyard more and more. I don't know why, could it be? She thought of something and hurriedly shut her mouth, but her expression was one of uncontrollable worry. In a pavilion in the courtyard, a woman's long sleeves fluttered in the wind. The corners of her robe were turned up to reveal tiny, dazzling, and exquisite silk patterns. A pair of slender hands flew up and down the strings of the zither. The melody was like the tinkling of spring water, pleasing to the ears, and seemed to be able to play into one's heart. After a while, the song ended, but Yao Niannian did not withdraw her hands. Her jade-like, stuttering hands were still on the zither. Her brows were calm, but there was something in her eyes that could not be described clearly, as if it could penetrate into one's heart. The corners of her lips curled up as she looked at the zither in front of her. However, she seemed to have thought of something else. Among the ashes on the ground, there was a piece of paper that had been used to practice calligraphy. Yao Niannian had always demanded perfection from herself. Among the ashes, there seemed to be something else. It was just that the unfamiliar handwriting had been mixed in with the ashes and vanished along with the fire, leaving nothing behind. Yao Niannian slowly opened her mouth to speak. It was not clear whether she was speaking to someone else or herself. Heart like a boulder, heart like a boulder. When two boulders collide, 200 will be injured. Jiang Wan, a person who can guess people's hearts. Her smile gradually gave rise to a sense of contempt. What a joke. In this world, there were indeed people who could play with people's hearts. Originally, she had thought that since Jiang Wan was so famous, she would naturally have something special about her. Now, it seemed that it was nothing more than a false rumor. That woman could not withstand a single blow, and was really nothing to be afraid of. There were many dark places in a person's heart. Perhaps it was harmless, but when those dark places were infinitely magnified, under the right opportunity, it could lead to irreparable mistakes. The bait has been cast, the small shrimp has also been hooked up. Yao Niannian stretched out a hand and lightly stroked the zither strings. However, when she reached the last string, her hand suddenly exerted force, and the zither let out a sharp cry before it snapped. Yao Niannian unhurriedly plucked the short string and smiled faintly. You may begin. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.